Chapter 1027. Ever since Yang Qindong's actions were announced, the people in the city spread the news. It did not take long for the news to spread throughout the city. While the commoners were cheering, many of them took the initiative to stand out and express their gratitude for defending the city. Ding Dingwei woke up after 4 hours of sleep. He walked out of the government office and found Yang Qindong. He represented the people in the city and asked for help. Okay, I agree. Yang Qindong thought for a while and agreed to let the people defend the city. This was not because he cared about Master Lu but because he wanted to hide his strength. Since Master Lu did not know that he led the troops into the city, he could use this to confuse him. As for Master Lu, he might be able to play a key role at the crucial moment. Hence, after Yang Qindong agreed, 3,000 of the 10,000 people were chosen as the first echelon to the city tower. They would defend the city together with the 3,000 Cambodian soldiers. There were also 500 Cold Vanguard soldiers. They took off their military uniforms and changed into civilian clothes. This was to ensure that the city tower would not be breached. Just as they finished their preparations, the 20,000 Siamese troops appeared outside Suing City. They guarded the 4 city gates. There were 5,000 soldiers stationed at each gate. They formed a formation that focused their attacks everywhere. The 6,500 soldiers were stationed at the 4 city towers. They had a clear division of labor and their morale was high. They knew that the 6th young master was watching them from afar. This was a good opportunity to perform. An hour later, the siege army was ready. The catapults opened up a path and the boulders were thrown. Although the boulders were not accurate, the momentum was not bad. With such momentum, the 20,000 Siamese troops roared as they charged forward. The siege had officially begun. This was destined to be a tragic battle to defend the city. Considering that they could not reveal their trump cards now, Master Ling did not use the guns that he brought. A battle of swords against swords, spears against spears and spears against spears began. Battle cries, shouts, screams and scoldings filled the 4 city towers for an entire day. There were a few times when the Siamese army managed to charge up the city walls, but they were quickly pushed back by the soldiers of Lung Wu's Cold Vanguard. With Yang Qindong as bait, the Siamese army did not stop attacking. By the time it was dark and they had to retreat, the Siamese army had left behind more than 6,000 dead bodies and countless wounded. Successfully defending the city gate tower was not without a price. Out of the 3,000 Cambodian soldiers and the 3,000 civilians in the city, the number of casualties reached 2,000. Even the 500 Cold Vanguard warriors lost nearly 10 people and more than 30 were injured. Yang Qindong had already expected that people would die in a war, not to mention that he had given up on the advantage of his musket. However, he could still afford such a loss. What he needed now was time for reinforcements to arrive. The reinforcements he was waiting for were the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army. There were nearly 20,000 people in total. From the moment Yang Qindong learned that the Siamese army had launched an attack, he sent a telegram to the grasslands 1st city. The 2 divisions also left the grasslands Benyugon Dusi area on the 3rd day after receiving the telegram, which was also Liaodu, and headed towards North Korea. The North Korean government also immediately prepared transport ships. When they arrived, they set sail for the south at high speed. Just as they were about to reach their destination, the telegram operator sent another message. The 6th young master had entered Suing City and was surrounded by 100,000 Siamese soldiers. He could be in danger at any time. Spread the news to every soldier. When we reach the shore, everyone is to advance at full speed. Anyone who slacks off will be beheaded. The eyes of the 1st Division of the Under Heaven Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, shone brightly as he spoke with an unquestionable tone. Lu Zhuo, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army, also gave the same order. In an instant, the cavalry of the 2 divisions became extremely nervous. They constantly checked their equipment in order to reach Suing City as quickly as possible and save the 6th young master from danger. When the news of Yang Qindong being trapped in Suing City reached Wanxiang City, Wan Shaochen and the others could no longer sit still. Luo Pe, the commander of the 2nd Army, received more than 10 letters of challenge from his subordinates. Without exception, all of them requested to lead troops to Suing City. Luo Pe suppressed all of them. The safety of Wanxiang City was more important to him. As for Suing City, he believed that the 6th young master had already made arrangements. If he sent troops to save Suing City and abandoned Wanxiang City, he would really be a sinner. Speed up the deployment of troops. I don't care what the reason is, all troops must gather within 7 days. Otherwise they will all be severely punished. Wan Xiaochen was rarely angry. He could understand Yang Qindong's actions. This could indeed draw the attention of Siam to Suing City, but at the same time it was also very risky. At the end of the day it was because they did not have enough troops. Otherwise, why would the sixth young master take the risk himself? Since Yang Qindong had previously handed the huge Lao province to him, at this crucial time he had to use all of his abilities to repay the favor. The deployment of troops had not been going on for a day or two. According to Wan Xiaochen's instructions, he had arranged for a certain number of soldiers to be recruited in every city in Lao province. Logically speaking, there were already reserve soldiers in every city. Gathering the strength of the entire Lao province, which had more than 3 million citizens, was not a difficult task to mobilize 100,000 strong men. The difficulty was that time was tight and the mission was important. To get 100,000 strong men to abandon their families and rush to Wanxiang City, they had to be given some time. Now that the sixth young master did not even care about his own life, what else was there to prepare? If not for the fact that he had to consider the distance between the cities, he would not even give them 7 days. After the order was sent out by the scouts, Wan Xiaochen, Commander Luo Po, Minister Long Tainan, and General He Guang started to discuss the plan to counterattack the Siam army. In Wanxiang City, there were 10,000 Lao soldiers and the 2nd and 6th Master Lu from Lungfeng. In total there were about 27,000 people. It would be difficult to break through the 200,000 strong Siam army with such a force. On the other hand, with the addition of 100,000 reserve soldiers, the situation would be completely different. At that time, 2nd Master Lu and 6th Master Lu would only need to continuously charge and not care about anything else. It was still possible for them to penetrate the enemy's army and create a huge hole to turn the situation around. With 2 divisions against 200,000 there will be some pressure. However, I believe that the 2nd and 6th Master Lu will be able to do well. In the meeting room, Commander Luo Per expressed his opinion. This time even the 6th young master was personally involved. As the commander of the 2nd Master Lu, he had no reason to back down. Okay, I will do my best to handle the logistics. The main force of Lungfeng can proceed without worry. Wan Xiaochen said. I will lead the troops with General He Guang. Things like transporting food and ammunition, cleaning up the battlefield and taking care of the prisoners will be left to the reserve soldiers. Long Tainan also stood out. This time, since it was such a coincidence, he had to perform well no matter what. He could use this opportunity to satisfy his addiction of leading troops. The 3 main characters were assigned their respective tasks. Next, it was time to take care of the public affairs. Those who needed to prepare the resources would prepare the resources, and those who needed to mobilize the soldiers would mobilize the soldiers. In Wanxiang City, a storm was brewing. In Suing City, after Yang Qindong appeared, they defended the city for another 8 days. In these 8 days, less than 1,000 of the Cambodian soldiers were left. The rest were either dead or injured. The citizens of Suing City also paid the price of more than 4,000 lives and more than 5,000 injured. Even the soldiers of the 5th Master Lu's Lungfeng suffered more than 100 casualties. After 6 days of intense defense, they had used up all the resources that were originally used to defend the city. Fire, oil, wood, stones and even bows and arrows were all used up. They had also used up almost all the men in Suing City. More than half of the adult men had gone up the city walls and participated in the battle. The losses were not small. Although Ding Dingwei was still doing agitation work and wanted the other half of the men to also participate in the siege, he was still politely rejected by Yang Qindong. In this battle, Suing City had sacrificed too much. The citizens joining the army was a voluntary matter. It was not something that could be forced. Even if these people were used, they would not be of much use. Moreover, he had been to the square more than once these days. There were many corpses and many injured people there. Many of them were untrained commoners. They were only men. Forcing them to fight with their lives on the city tower was a little too unreasonable. 6th young master, we do not have enough soldiers. If we do not rely on them, how are we going to defend the city when the Siamese army is so fierce? Ding Dingwei could understand Yang Qindong's love for the citizens. However, for the sake of the bigger picture, he could not help but make another suggestion. We have the 5th Master Lu to defend the city. At the very least we have my 1,000 black cavalry. They are only citizens and have not undergone any training. Most of them will die. Yang Qindong's voice was full of determination. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand decisively. Well, it's settled. If Deputy Governor Ding is interested, you can consider organizing a reserve army and prepare to capture prisoners on the battlefield. Sixth young master, what are you planning to do? Ding Ding Wei seemed to have thought of something. That's right. I don't plan to defend the city anymore. Let's kill our way out, attract the enemy's attention and disrupt their plans. Perhaps this will increase our chances of victory. Yang Qindong nodded silently. He did not like to be attacked passively. Seeing that the citizens in the city were almost exhausted, if he continued to defend the city, it would only increase the number of deaths. He did not want to be known as a person who took advantage of the citizens if they won the war. Of course, the most important thing was that the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army had sent a telegram saying that they had successfully landed at the port of Baji and would arrive here in 2 or 3 days. That would be the time for him to launch an all-out counterattack. Chapter 1028. Hearing Yang Qindong's reply, Ding Ding Wei could not help but cry. He then shook his head and said, "No. Sixth young master, if you stay in the city you can at least defend it. But if you rush out you will be surrounded at any time. You will be isolated and helpless at any time. That is too dangerous." Dangerous? How can war not be dangerous? Don't worry, this young master knows what to do. Yang Qindong could feel Ding Ding Wei's concern from the bottom of his heart. He patted his shoulder and said, "Then it's decided. You just need to organize your men to clean up the battlefield." Yang Qindong decided to leave and called the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining. "Commander Xiao, the most brutal battle has come. I don't know if you have the confidence to face the Siamese army in an open field for 3 days. Remember, within 3 days, there may not be any reinforcements and no one will replenish our ammunition." "Sixth young master, I promise to complete the mission." Xiao Yining gave a standard military salute and said confidently. This time the 5th Division came in a hurry. In order to pursue speed, many divisions and regiments did not bring their heavy weapons. They did not even bring a lot of ammunition. This was their shortcoming. But since it was the task requested by Yang Qindong, even if they used up all the bullets and destroyed all the swords, in the end, they had to bite with their teeth and grab with their hands to fight with the enemy until the last moment to complete the task of guarding for 3 days. "Okay, then you go and prepare." "Oh right, there is still some ammunition in the warehouse of the Yang family bank in the city. Take it and equip the troops," Yang Qindong said encouragingly. As for the ammunition in the bank, it was originally not there. He took it out from the warehouse at the last minute. A small amount of ammunition could be used to bluff their way through, but if they prepared too much, they would not be able to hide it even if they wanted to. Even so, the manager of the Yang family bank in Suing City was still confused. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of any ammunition stored in the depths of the warehouse. Xiao Yining happily took his men to collect the ammunition. In Yang Qindong's opinion, with the help of these ammunition, there would be no problem in defending the upper 3 days against the cold weapon army armed with sabers, spears, swords and sticks. Little did he know that this time he was not facing less than 100,000 Siamese soldiers, but more than 200,000 Siamese soldiers. Ever since Tong Si saw Yang Qindong appear in Suing City, he sent someone to send the news back. Then he used his authority to mobilize the Siamese army behind him. When the news reached Bangkok, King Ili Chi immediately mobilized 150,000 troops towards Suing City, along with 50 cannons. These cannons were originally intended to be used in the siege of Golden Rim City, but because they were too cumbersome, the transportation was delayed for some time. Today all the cannons had been transported, and the first 20,000 cavalrymen had also arrived. After 6 days of siege, along with the previous losses, Tong Si's army of 100,000 had lost 10,000 men, with another 10,000 injured, leaving 80,000 men. However, as he continued to mobilize his troops, he managed to gather another 30,000 men. Now, with the addition of the 20,000 cavalrymen that had just arrived, the total number of soldiers had reached 130,000. Not only that, according to the news brought by the cavalrymen, in the next 2 days, another 130,000 reinforcements would arrive. This was equivalent to a total of 200,000 soldiers, which was very close to the number of civilians in Suing City. With sufficient troops, cannons and cavalrymen, Tong Si was filled with confidence. He was already prepared to go all out to attack the city tomorrow. He wanted to send the main force of the army tomorrow and fight for a decisive battle. Tong Si did not know that Yang Qindong had already prepared for battle outside the city. Similarly, Yang Qindong did not know that more reinforcements had arrived as well as 50 more cannons. This directly led to many accidents and fierce battles in the following battle. Tong Si was prepared to launch an all-out attack tomorrow morning, while Yang Qindong was prepared to break out of the city in the middle of the night. This kind of unintentional timing difference allowed them to protect Suing City. In a sense, it could be considered a victory. The sky had already darkened, and the Lu 5th Division and the 1,000 black cavalry that were preparing to leave the city with Yang Qindong had already made all kinds of preparations. However, just as they were about to leave the city, Ding Ding Wei, General De En, and the civilians of the city lined up on both sides of the road to send them off. In order to protect Suing City, the news of the 6th Young Master's decision to lure the enemy out of the city had already spread throughout the city. The citizens who heard the news were extremely touched and came out to send him off to express their gratitude as ordinary citizens. Haha. Yang Qindong, who was already wearing a golden cloak, rode on the white dragon and smiled at the civilians who came to send them off. He could understand the feelings of the people at this moment, but he did not know what to say other than to say, "Go back." He entered the city alone, and it was true that he risked his life to lure the enemy. It was also true that he took the opportunity to protect the surrounding cities from attack. But all of this was achieved at the cost of the lives of the people of Suing City. In a way, he had let down the people here. But they still sent him off with gratitude, so what else could he say? Only when he saw Ding Ding Wei and De En did he say a few more words. "I will go out this time to make my name known. Logically speaking, the Siamese army should not attack the city. But you can't be careless. The city gates must be closed. When you see the red signal flare in the sky, that is when you can leave the city. Understand? 6th Young Master, don't worry. We will remember. But you must be careful." Ding Ding Wei and Da En said with tears in their eyes. "Don't worry. With the 5th Lu Division and the Black Cavalry, no one can hurt the young master." Yang Qindong's laughter was still echoing in the air. His words made the Black Cavalry and the soldiers of the 5th Lu Division proud. They would definitely not let anyone harm a single hair on the 6th Young Master. This was their mission and mission. In order to complete this mission, they were even willing to give up their lives. While his laughter was still echoing in the air, the city gates of Suing City were opened. The Black Cavalry led the charge out, followed by the soldiers of the 5th Lu Division. After that, the city gates were closed, cutting off Yang Qindong's escape route. The Black Cavalry suddenly came out of the city and launched a fierce attack on the Siamese army's camp. For a moment, the sound of people shouting and horses neighing could be heard. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was lying down. He had just fallen asleep when he was awakened by the battle cries. Then a subordinate came to report that someone was breaking out of Suing City, led by a group of cavalry. After hearing the news, Tong Si put on his armor and said loudly, "It must be Yang Qindong trying to break out of the encirclement. Isn't it a little too late to escape now? Order the other city gates to not move in case the enemy is trying to lure us away. Order 20,000 cavalry to move out and order the cannons to fire in that direction. Order 50,000 mobile troops to be ready. They will depart with me in half an hour. General, fire the cannons now. There are still many of our brothers outside the southern gate." The messenger could not help but panic when he heard the order. "It doesn't matter. Losing some men to kill Yang Qindong is worth it no matter how I look at it. Let's just carry out this order," Tong Si said without hesitation. At this moment, the only goal in his mind was to kill Yang Qindong. In order to achieve this goal, everything else could be sacrificed. Outside the southern gate, the Black Cavalry led the charge into the enemy's camp and launched a frenzied attack on the 5,000 Siamese soldiers. With every swing of their swords, the Siamese soldiers fell to the ground one by one. Their corpses were strewn across the ground, emitting the stench of blood. The Black Cavalry was brave and fierce. The 5,000 Siamese soldiers were no match for them. Very quickly, other than those who were killed, the rest of the Siamese soldiers escaped without a trace. Yang Qindong, who had also killed a few enemies on his horse, chuckled. He then ordered the 5th Lu Division to leave immediately and head towards the barren hills in the southwest direction. He had landed there when he arrived, and it was a good place to attack and defend. After Yang Qindong defeated the enemy, he led the 1,000 black cavalry out of the battlefield. The 1st, 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 5th Lu Division left with them. Only the 4th Regiment stayed behind to cover the rear. The 4th Regiment was the cause of the accident. The 4th Regiment commander, Ru Kai, followed the original plan and walked at the back to ensure the safety of the army. The group didn't seem to be in a hurry, and Ru Kai didn't seem to be in a hurry either. With the gun in his hand, he was confident that he wouldn't be afraid even if the enemy chased after him. As long as he could hold them off for a while, the barren hills a dozen li away from the city would form an effective defensive formation. At that time he would be absolutely safe. Ru Kai was very confident, but he had forgotten one thing. Or rather, he had overlooked one thing. What if the other party also had firearms? This was a common problem not only for Ru Kai but also for most of the officers and soldiers of the Cold Front. They were used to fighting enemies who did not have firearms. Over time, a subconscious thought formed that other than them, the other enemies did not have firearms and did not know how to use them. It was this bad habit that led to the problem. Just as the 4th Regiment was moving towards the barren hills, the sound of cannons suddenly rang out. When Ru Kai heard the sound of the cannons, he even had the misconception that the cannons were from his side. When the cannons were fired, they should not be attacking him. It was precisely this kind of thinking that occupied the dominant position, which prevented him from lying on the ground at the first moment, nor did he make any defensive movements at the first time. As luck would have it, one of the cannonballs landed about 10 feet away from him. Then one of the cannonballs hit his chest and abdomen. Ru Kai was in so much pain that he almost fainted. Chapter 1029. At the same time as Ru Kai, there were also a dozen or so soldiers who were injured by the bombardment. They were all careless and did not think of dodging at all, so they were hit by the aftershocks of the bombardment. Some of them were even more unlucky and were directly killed by the bombardment. The entire 4th Division was in chaos. Feeling the pain getting worse, Ru Kai bit his lips and forced himself to stay alert. At this time, the Vice Commander Xian rushed to his side. When he saw Ru Kai's pale face and the blood on his body, he cried out in shock. "Commander, you're injured?" "It's okay, it's just a small injury." Ru Kai forced a smile. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of horses galloping could be heard. Ru Kai's expression changed. This time he had a feeling that it wasn't the 6th young master and his black cavalry. From the sound of the horses galloping, there were at least 5,000 of them. This was definitely not something the black cavalry could produce. Ru Kai was shocked that the Siamese army had artillery and cavalry. However, he still said in a serious tone, "How about this, Deputy Commander Xian? I order you to immediately retreat with the main force of the regiment. All the injured soldiers will stay behind and cover the rear with me." "No, Commander, I will stay behind and make arrangements to bring you away." Xian shook his head. His tears flowed down uncontrollably. "It's no use. I know my body. Under such circumstances it's hard to save me. Alright, follow my orders. Quick." Ru Kai shook his head. He knew that if he gave the order, Xian would really stay behind to cover the rear. However, he didn't want to leave the hope of survival to himself and push his comrades to their deaths. Not to mention he was already half dead. Even if he escaped and was saved, he would only be a cripple in the future. He was the Cold Front, the most powerful Cold Front. He would never allow himself to become a useless person. "Commander." Xian continued to call out. "Please tell the 6th young master that I, Ru Kai, have been very proud since the day I joined the Cold Front. I have never regretted it." With a happy smile on his face, Ru Kai ordered again. "Xian, I now appoint you as the acting commander of the 4th Division. Take the soldiers and retreat. Quick." "Yes." Xian gave a very standard military salute, turned around with tears in his eyes and loudly announced the order. Many soldiers had already noticed everything that had happened here, but military orders were obeyed. At this moment, everyone could not stay here any longer. Many soldiers saluted in the direction where Ru Kai had fallen in the night, and then the main force of the regiment began to retreat rapidly. Just as Xian retreated with the main force of the 4th Regiment, another rumbling sound of cannons rang out. Ru Kai and the others who were already prepared for this, lay down on the ground and dodged the cannons that had no target this time. When they raised their heads, the sound of horse hooves was already very close to them. Ru Kai, who was holding the 95 style in his hand, laughed and said to the dozens of comrades around him, "Come on, let us enjoy the last battle to our heart's content, let us fight." Da-da-da-da. In the dark night, the sound of gunfire continued to ring out, flying towards the approaching Siamese cavalry. Screams of agony rose one after another, until all the bullets and magazines on his body were used up. Only then did Ru Kai let out a long sigh of relief. Then his right hand went to his waist and took out a grenade. He shouted to the others, "Take out your grenades. Even if we die, we can't let our weapons fall into the enemy's hands." "Sir." All the soldiers who stayed behind replied in unison. Not long after, the sound of horse hooves approached again. When they were completely submerged in the surroundings of Ru Kai and the others, a series of booming sounds rang out. It was the sound of grenades being detonated. When they heard the sound, Yang Qindong was rushing over with 1,000 black cavalry. When the sound of cannons rang out, Yang Qindong knew that something was wrong. When he asked if the 4th Regiment had caught up, he led the black cavalry back. He wanted to use the speed of the war horses to save as many people as possible. On the way back, he met Deputy Commander Shen Yuan, who told him about Ru Kai. Yang Qindong's eyes were filled with murderous intent as he said, "Let's go back. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, we cannot let a comrade fall into the hands of the enemy." The black cavalry replied in unison and followed Yang Qindong on both sides of the road. Not long after they left, the sound of grenades exploding rang out. Yang Qindong reined in his horse and saw the fire that rose into the sky 3 or 4 miles ahead. He seemed to have guessed what had happened there. "Good job, comrades. Don't worry, I'll definitely avenge you. Where's Longwei? Come with me and kill them before we retreat. We want to collect some interest first." "Collect interest." 1,000 black cavalry replied in a loud voice. At this moment, even Beta Persei did not dissuade Yang Qindong from leaving, because he knew that if he did not vent his anger, the young master would definitely not return to the barren mountains with him. In the dark of the night, the first 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen who arrived were first attacked by the Type 95. Then a few hundred of them were injured by dozens of grenades. Before they could figure out what was going on, another cavalry unit appeared in front of them. These cavalrymen were all wearing heavy armor, so they simply ignored the ordinary sword attacks. On the contrary, the steel swords in the hands of the cavalrymen were very sharp. In a few moves, not only were the cavalrymen about to fall off their horses, but their weapons were also broken into 2 pieces. In the process of the cavalrymen's charge, a loud voice shouted, "King Wunan of Damyong is here, quickly accept your death." 1,000 black cavalry, under the leadership of Yang Qindong, penetrated through the 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen, then turned around and killed more than 3,000 cavalrymen. After almost crippling the 5,000 cavalrymen, they left. With the help of the moonlight, one could see a very obvious figure wearing a golden cloak as he left. 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen. After this ordeal, only 1/5 of them were left. Half an hour later, General Tong arrived. Seeing the tragic situation here, he asked what happened. When he understood what happened, he was naturally excited. "Ah, the man wearing the golden cloak must be Yang Qindong. Come follow me, it's time to make a great contribution." On the barren mountains, Yang Qindong had already retreated with the black cavalry. The soldiers of the 5th Division had already set up a defensive formation. At this moment, they were digging fortifications and preparing for a long battle. At this moment, almost everyone was lowering their heads and working. They regarded the sacrifice of Ru Kai as a kind of motivation and suppressed it in their hearts, waiting for a moment to erupt. Yang Qindong stood behind the trench and stared at the darkness in front of him. Artillery first, then cavalry. He did not receive news of this in advance. It seemed that there was a problem with the intelligence network. Facts also proved that on the battlefield, any small mistake could lead to a very fatal problem. At this moment, Yang Qindong could not help but think of Yunk, the head of the Security Bureau in Southeast Asia, who was still recuperating in Xianxia City. Because of his health condition, Yunk was recuperating in the first hospital of Xianxia City. The intelligence here was handed over to his assistant, Golden Rooster. The name was not bad. It sounded like a golden rooster standing on one leg. However, since the beginning of the war, when Siam was preparing to send out troops, until the beginning of the war there was no warning in advance. This golden rooster was simply useless. It was precisely because of his work mistakes that they suffered setbacks on the battlefield. Now even the 4th Regiment commander was sacrificed. Golden Rooster was unforgivable if he was to be held accountable. Send a report to Zhou Xian. I want an explanation. I also want an explanation for the soldiers. Yang Qindong said in a cold voice. Beta Persei, who was standing next to him, could not help but shudder. He knew that someone would have to pay the price for Ru Kai's death. In the camp of the Siamese army, shortly after a grenade explosion, General Tong arrived with his men. He learned from the other cavalry that Yang Qindong had already left the city and was guarding the barren hills outside the city. He didn't run. Very good, then you don't have to run. Order, surround the barren hills, not even a fly is allowed to fly out. Quickly mobilize the troops, surround this place and launch an attack as soon as possible. At the same time, send a message to His Majesty asking for more troops. As long as we can take down this big fish, the Siamese army will soar. As Tong shouted excitedly, more and more Siamese soldiers surrounded the barren hills. The scouts of the 5th Division also kept reporting what they saw to Yang Qindong's ears. 6th Young Master, you should retreat first. It's too dangerous here. The commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, stood in front of Yang Qindong and said earnestly. His life was worthless and he could put it in any dangerous place. However, Yang Qindong was different. He was the soul of Xianxia. If something happened to him, the future of the entire Xianxia would be unimaginable. I won't leave. Only by staying here can I attract the full attention of the Siamese army and ensure the safety of the other cities. Commander Xiao, I don't have to say much. If you have this time, you'd better find the position of the enemy's artillery, lock onto him and don't let it play a role in the next battle. Yang Qindong sat on a boulder and said unhurriedly. He wanted to place himself in a dangerous place. Only then would the soldiers put their lives on the line and have a chance of winning the battle. The 5th Division possessed firearms that were more advanced than the firearms of this era, but after all they only had 8,000 soldiers. According to the scouts, the number of Siamese soldiers surrounding the barren hills had reached more than 100,000, and the number was still increasing. This battle was destined to be extremely difficult. If they couldn't hold any ground, the consequences would be unimaginable. If he left now, it would be the same as putting the 5th Division in an extremely dangerous situation. This was not something he wanted to see. He wanted to stay and hold the fort with everyone. He believed that as long as he was here, the soldiers' will to fight would not be extinguished. Reinforcements would also arrive at a faster speed. Chapter 10:30. After all, there were more than 10 times, 20 times and possibly even more enemies. Even if they were fully equipped with firearms, once the enemy decided to fight without regard for their lives, the firearms wouldn't be able to withstand it. The firearms would be fine, but they wouldn't have enough bullets. This was destined to be a fierce battle, a huge battle. Hearing Yang Qindong's determination, Xiao Yining could only sigh and leave. Since the 6th Young Master was not willing to leave, he would not allow any enemy to reach the barren mountain, even if he had to sacrifice his life and the entire 5th Division. The Siamese soldiers continued to surround the mountain. A night passed and then a morning passed. At noon, the barren mountain was finally surrounded. If they wanted to escape from any direction, they would have to face at least 30,000 enemies. When Tong Si completed the encirclement, the final attack began. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the sound of war drums could be heard from all around the barren hills. Then soldiers in Siamese uniforms appeared from all directions. They were either holding swords, spears or swords and shields. They approached the barren hills from all directions. The sound of war drums could be heard in all directions, guiding the Siamese soldiers forward step by step. Looking down from the top of the barren mountain, one could see the enemy's silhouettes. They were like ants as they approached. 1,000 meters, 800 meters, 600 meters. As the enemy approached, the soldiers of the 5th Division were very calm. Long years of training had allowed them to maintain a calm heart. The Bugnam of Gojosian flag, which represented Yang Qindong's identity, was placed at the highest point of the barren mountain. Every soldier who saw it felt warm in their hearts. They firmly believed that as long as the flag did not fall, they would not stop fighting. 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. When the enemy was 300 meters away, the first gunshot was fired by Zhou Xian. The bullet spun out and hit a soldier in the Siamese flag. As the Siamese flag fell, tens of thousands of guns were fired at the enemy who was approaching them. Tong Si only knew that Yang Qindong was on the barren mountain, but he had no idea how many 5-star army soldiers there were. He didn't get any information in advance, nor did he have any advanced equipment like high-powered binoculars. Everything was done by relying on the naked eye and estimation. This caused him to suffer a big loss in the first round of gunfire. Under the simultaneous firing of tens of thousands of guns, the firepower was intertwined. Among them, there was no lack of large-scale weapons like the machine guns used by the 95th Squad. The Siamese soldiers charged for less than a quarter of an hour before they were forced to retreat. Behind them, corpses littered the ground like a mountain. No one was fearless of death, especially when many of their companions were killed before they could even see the face of the enemy. This scene frightened the unprepared Siamese soldiers. When some of the shield-wielding soldiers realized that their opponents weren't shooting arrows but bullets, they realized how ridiculous it was for them to hold shields. In such a situation they could only retreat. In less than a quarter of an hour, more than 3,000 corpses were left behind in all directions. The Siamese army's first attack had ended in failure. When the news reached Tong Si's ears, he was not discouraged. Instead, he was very happy. They were all gunmen. This should be the main force of the 5-star army. Previously he was worried that someone would impersonate Yang Qindong and come to the barren mountain. Now it seemed that there was no need to worry. The person in the mountain was Yang Qindong without a doubt. The target had been identified. Although the guns were powerful, he had other advantages. For example, he had 50 newly shipped cannons and more than 10,000 cavalrymen. These could be his trump cards to achieve his final goal. Push the cannons up. At the same time, order 5,000 cavalrymen to get ready. Once the opportunity is right, we will charge. I want to see if their guns have an endless supply of gunpowder, Tong Si said confidently. The general gave the order and the cannons began to move forward. The 5,000 cavalrymen were also prepared. All of this was seen by Commander Zhou Xian, who was on the barren mountain. Damn it, it finally appeared. Cannoneers, confirm the target's position and adjust the gauge. Wait for orders. Zhou Yining's voice was filled with anger when he finally saw the cannon that killed the 4th Regiment commander. Yang Qindong also saw the appearance of the cannons through the binoculars, and then he smiled. Some things were still a deterrent when they were not used. However, once they were used, they would lose their deterrence. As for whether these cannons could hurt him and the soldiers of the 5th Division, Yang Qindong was not worried at all. From what he knew, other than the 5-star army, other cannons could only fire up to a distance of 3 miles. For example, Beiming's self-made cannons could not even fire up to a distance of 1 mile due to various technical reasons. How could these cannons pose a threat to him? Yang Qindong's confidence influenced the other soldiers. A few of the 100mm mortars that were already set up were constantly adjusting their aim. However, they were not in a hurry to fire. The 5-star army also had cannons, and their attack range was several times longer than the Siamese army's cannons. Right now, this was still not public news. Therefore, their current goal was to destroy all of the enemy's cannons as much as possible when the enemy was not prepared for it. If they could not destroy the cannons in one shot, it would not be fun if the enemy suddenly pushed the cannons forward at night when everyone's vision was blocked. The 20 mortars locked onto the cannons that were slowly moving forward. Soon they determined that the enemy had 30 cannons. After seeing that there were no more cannons, Commander Zhou Xian gave the order and shouted, "Fire!" Boom, boom, boom. The sound of cannons rang out and 20 shells were fired at the same time, covering the entire area in an instant. After a burst of fire, the 30 cannons of the Siamese army, as well as the hundreds of Siamese soldiers who were pushing the cannons forward, were all annihilated. Tong Si, who was still waiting for the news of victory, heard the sound of cannons. His intuition told him that this was not a good sign. He knew the sound and power of his own cannons. They were not as loud and powerful as this. Could it be that the enemy had brought cannons with them? The facts told him that his guess was correct. It was indeed not his side that fired the cannons. Not only that, his own cannons were all destroyed in this round of artillery fire. The 30 cannons he sent out were all turned into piles of red-hot scrap iron without exception. There were only 50 cannons in total. Losing 30 cannons in one shot made Tong Si furious. He immediately shouted, "Charge! Charge! Cavalry! Charge! I want to kill them." The second full-scale attack began. There was no more probing. Instead, there was a continuous barrage of attacks. Wave after wave of Siamese soldiers fell in the path of the charge. 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen also launched a fierce attack from the north under the cover of the infantry. They wanted to open up a gap. As long as they could get close to the 5-star army, they could win with the advantage of numbers. "Black cavalry! Get on the horses with me!" Seeing the 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen charging at him, Yang Qindong knew that it would be difficult to rely on his muskets to block them all. Thus, he leaped onto his horse and led 1,000 black knights to launch a counterattack. Compared to the ordinary Siamese cavalrymen, the black cavalry was like a divine weapon. The Siamese cavalry were invulnerable, their weapons were sharp, and their individual qualities were excellent. With the help of the arrow point formation and the Type 33 formation, the Siamese cavalry was pierced through by the Siamese cavalry as soon as they clashed with the enemy. The original formation became chaotic. When the formation of the cavalrymen was broken, they could not take care of each other and could not communicate with each other. Their strength was reduced by at least half. In the face of the ferocious attacks of the black cavalry, there was nothing they could do other than cover their heads and flee. In the face of the black cavalry who had experienced countless battles, the 5,000 Siamese cavalrymen were defeated before they could make use of their advantage in numbers. This also indicated that the second attack of the Siamese army was a failure. More than 2 hours later, the sky was almost dark. The Siamese army had paid a price of nearly 10,000 men and retreated in defeat. The barren hills were littered with corpses, and the pungent smell of blood filled the air, making it unpleasant to the nose. In such an environment, the 5th Master Lu began to eat. They lit a campfire, set up a camp stove, and began to cook. Although the environment was not good and the air was filled with a nauseating smell, the soldiers were exhausted after an afternoon of fierce fighting. It was necessary to replenish their energy and food. Regardless of whether they were hungry or not, they had to eat something for the upcoming battle. A bowl of hot soup, a few pieces of jerky, and a box of canned fish. This was the standard meal for every soldier. Yang Qindong also had the same food in front of him. When the food was served, he did not hesitate to pick it up and eat it with relish. At this time, Yang Qindong's stomach was churning. However, he still forced himself to eat because he knew that if he did not take the lead, the others would find it even more difficult to eat. Reality proved that the role of an example was not small. When some of the soldiers smelled the unpleasant smell, they couldn't swallow their food. However, when they saw that even the 6th young master had eaten and was so happy, what else could they refuse? Every warrior forced the food into their stomachs, and immediately their fatigue was reduced by a lot. This was the role of a commander. Otherwise, how could there be such a saying that a lion leading a flock of sheep could defeat a sheep leading a flock of lions? After eating the food, Yang Qindong looked at the darkening sky and ordered, "Everyone take the time to rest. The enemy will not attack for the next 4 hours. However, when the sky is completely dark, there may be a fierce battle. Everyone go into the trenches and hide. The scouts will take turns to rest." Chapter 1031. Yang Qindong had just experienced a fierce battle in the afternoon. From his point of view, the toughest moment had yet to arrive. The darkness before dawn was the most dangerous. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was fuming. After an afternoon of all-out attacks, more than 10,000 soldiers had died and countless were injured. Most of the injuries were caused by his own soldiers trampling each other as they retreated. He could not accept this result. After 2 battles, he had a rough idea of Yang Qindong's military strength. It was less than 10,000 soldiers. However, in the afternoon he had sent out 80,000 soldiers to attack from 4 different directions. Not only had none of them made it to the barren mountains, they hadn't injured a single enemy. Moreover, they had suffered such great losses. How could he not be enraged? After venting his anger, Tong Si was in a much better mood. He started to summarize his failures and quickly made 2 important improvements. First, a large reward. Second, an inspection team was set up. The reward was announced publicly. Anyone who captured Yang Chendong alive would be rewarded 10,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 5 ranks. Anyone who killed Yang Chendong would be rewarded 8,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 4 ranks. As the saying went, when there was a large reward there would be brave men. He believed that this method would be effective on normal soldiers. After all, once this matter was completed, it would change their lives. The inspection team was specially prepared to deal with soldiers who fled in defeat. It was not enough to motivate them with money. They also had to place a lock behind the soldiers. Once they retreated, they would be killed without mercy. In that case, he believed that even if he was tired, he would be able to exhaust the 5-star army to death. Not only these two, Tong Si also decided to launch an attack at night. Although they were not good at night battles, they could only send the remaining 20 cannons up with the help of the night. Not only that, he also mobilized the remaining 10,000 cavalrymen. His experience during the day told him that the 5-star army was better than the cavalrymen. However, they were not without weaknesses. For example, in terms of numbers, the enemy was at a disadvantage. The 5-star army had a limited number of cavalrymen. They might be able to defend against the cavalrymen in one direction, but what if they attacked in all directions? The shadow cavalry would not be able to disperse their forces. He constantly changed his attack methods and made various preparations. 4 hours later, a set of effective attack methods in Tong's eyes was formulated. In order for the plan to be carried out smoothly, he mobilized a total of 120,000 soldiers to prepare for the attack. I don't believe that 120,000 of us can't defeat you. If we can't, reinforcements will arrive at any time. I want to see if you are made of iron. After Tong Si finished speaking, he began to issue the attack plan and order to his subordinates. Even at night, the weather in June was still very hot. A light breeze blew and the stench of blood filled the barren hills. However, the soldiers of the 5-star army acted as if they didn't hear anything. They leaned against the trenches and slept. A good warrior must first learn how to rest, learn how to keep oneself in the best condition. Everyone pay attention. The enemy's cannons are coming up. In the silence, the scout on duty discovered something and shouted. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as he shouted, the sound of cannons rang out. Then heavy cannons landed around the barren hills, causing the ground to tremble. When the cannons landed outside the trenches, all the soldiers were awakened from their sleep. Yang Chendong was also awakened the moment the cannons landed. Then he felt the throbbing of the white dragon horse beside him. He stretched out his arm and gently stroked the horse while listening to the direction of the cannons. As the best soldier king in the past, it could be said that he had spent half of his life dealing with guns and cannons. In this aspect, he had a sense of alertness that others did not have. The direction is northwest. Order the cannons to counterattack. Based on his experience, after roughly determining the location of the enemy's cannons, Yang Chendong decisively gave the order to counterattack. Beta Persei, who had been waiting by the side, immediately shouted with his unique loud voice. Then the cannoneers began to load the cannons. Then the cannoneers fired the cannons and landed 2.5 miles northwest. Boom, boom, boom. The 5-star army's rapid counterattack blew up 20 cannons of the Siamese army. When he saw that the 20 cannons had been blown up into scrap metal after only 1 round of cannons, Tong jumped up in exasperation. Attack, attack, attack on all fronts. Whoever kills Yang Chendong will be heavily rewarded and given the title of nobility. Kill. As Tong shouted, the first echelon of the Siamese army rushed out from 4 directions. At the same time, the first echelon of the Siamese army also rushed out. In the dark night, a full-scale attack began. Attack, cover the area with cannons and machine guns. If the enemy is close, throw grenades. Don't let the enemy rush up the barren hills. Yang Chendong walked out of the trenches and shouted loudly. He had already heard the sound of iron horses galloping from all directions. He knew very well that the enemy had divided their forces. Since that was the case, his role in leading the cavalry out was very limited. Furthermore, in the dark, visibility was limited. The speed of the war horses was very fast. If they really rushed out, the danger would only increase. Therefore, he left his war horse in the trenches and walked into the trenches with a Type 95 in his hand. Following Yang Chendong's orders, the cannons began their counterattack. Since there were many enemies, no one knew how many enemies would be killed at any point of attack. The machine guns of the Type 95 squad did not stop for even a moment. They continuously shot out bullets, trying their best to destroy the approaching enemies and blast them away. The sound of gunshots was like firecrackers. Bullets were fired one after another, sweeping the enemies' bodies. At this moment, human lives were the most worthless thing. However, the Siamese army was already prepared. Although there were soldiers dying in the charge every moment, the charging troops did not have any intention of stopping. They continued to charge in an organized manner. When a group of people died, another group of people would rush up to replace them. Wave after wave of attacks, the Lu 5th Division on the barren hill finally showed signs of being overwhelmed. A few of the Type 95 squad machine guns had to take a short break because the barrels were too hot. The Siamese soldiers took this opportunity to charge up to the foot of the barren hill. Then they strode into the barren hill. "Blast them out!" Dang Liming shouted to his comrades when he saw the enemy enter his formation. He took out a bayonet from his thigh and attached it to the Type 95. Then he was the first to charge out of the trenches. He wanted to use his actions to tell the enemy that Lung Feng was not only good with guns, he was also good with bayonets. The regiment commander rushed out, and the other soldiers also flashed their bayonets one by one. They followed closely behind and pounced towards the enemy outside the trenches. Every soldier widened their eyes and used all of their strength to deliver a fatal shot to the enemy's chest according to the requirements of the assassination training. Use the grenades as cover. Suppress the enemy's charging momentum. The battalion commander behind Commander Dang Liming shouted as he pulled out a grenade from his waist and threw it forward. Immediately there was a thunderous roar, and the Siamese soldiers roared as they repelled the enemy's attack. At the same time, Dang Liming took the lead and led a group of soldiers to kill the Siamese at the front and reclaim the position that they had lost. The machine guns that had been cooled down by cold water rang out again, suppressing the enemy's approach. This kind of repeated battle for positions happened many times that day. It was not until late at night when it started to drizzle that the Siamese troops stopped attacking. The battlefield became quiet again. Clean up the battlefield, check the injuries and check the weapons and equipment. Zhou Yining, the commander of the Lu 5th Division, patiently walked in the trenches and passed down orders to the soldiers. Sometimes he even reached out to help some of his comrades carry the bodies or bandage the wounds. Yang Qindong led 1,000 Black Knights and sat on the highest point of the barren mountain. From the beginning of the war until now, even when the trenches were about to be taken, they did not make a move. They had been conserving their strength because they knew that there would be more important tasks for them to complete. 6th Young Master, the casualty statistics are out. After a day and a night of fighting, more than 400 soldiers of the 5th Division were killed, more than 1,000 were seriously injured and 5,000 were injured. Zhou Yining said in a sobbing voice. For him, this was the biggest sacrifice he had made since he joined the Battle of the Cold Front. In the face of Zhou Yining's complaints, Yang Qindong did not reprimand nor did he console him. He only replied with 3 simple words, "Got it." After saying these words, he finally got up slowly and patted the white dragon horse beside him. "Old man, it's time for us to show our power. Are you ready?" Although it was only a war horse, the white dragon seemed to be able to understand Yang Qindong's words. It could not help but raise its neck and neighed. This caused Yang Qindong to laugh out loud. "All right, since you're ready, then let's have a big fight. Brothers, are you ready?" "We're ready." 1,000 Black Knights answered him in unison. Beta Persei was also standing among the Black Knights. After answering this sentence, he carefully took a few steps forward. "6th Master, why don't you not participate in this operation? Anything can happen on the battlefield." Yang Qindong already knew what Beta Persei was going to say. Without waiting for him to speak, he had already said, "There's no need to persuade me. The soldiers can fight with their lives on the line and be fearless. Why can't I? It's settled. We'll attack in 4 groups according to the plan." 1,000 Black Knights were divided into 4 groups. Yang Qindong, Beta Persei, 1st Brigade Leader Qiuvi, and 2nd Brigade Leader Dao Shao would each lead a group to attack. This was originally part of the plan. How could they change it at the last minute? Chapter 1032. Beta Persei had followed Yang Qindong for a long time and knew the temperament of the young master well. Most of the time he was easy to talk to and listen to advice. However, once he made a decision, it was not something that could be changed at any time. Knowing that it was useless to persuade him, Beta Persei spoke to Badao Jiang and Ping Yu, who were in Yang Qindong's team. I'll leave the young master's safety to you. If anything happens, I'll kill you. Second brother, don't worry. Even if we die in battle, our souls will protect the sixth young master and bring him back safely. Badao Jiang and Ping Yu said with a solemn expression. 1,000 people were divided into 4 teams, which meant that each team had about 250 people. Due to the rain, the Siamese soldiers had to rest and reorganize. When they stopped attacking, Yang Qindong personally led them to launch a counterattack. Before they set off, Yang Qindong said to Xiao Yining, "Cook immediately and take the time to rest. The soldiers are very tired after fighting for a day and a night. I'm afraid there will be more difficult battles waiting for us. The more energy we have, the more likely we will win. Sixth young master, don't worry. We will wait for your triumphant return. Hot meals will be waiting for you and the Black Cavalry." Xiao Yining stood straight and saluted. Definitely. Yang Qindong's face revealed a confident smile. Then he lightly clamped his legs and rode the white dragon horse in the direction of the retreating Siamese soldiers. The battle had been going on for a day and a night. Under the tense atmosphere, the Siamese soldiers were exhausted. Taking advantage of the light rain, they rested for a short while. From their point of view, the 5-star army was small in number and it was almost impossible for them to change the battle. They were tired and needed to rest. Their opponents should take this opportunity to lie down on the ground and rest. It was impossible for them to launch a counterattack and threaten the Siamese soldiers. Under such circumstances, the Siamese soldiers did not even bother to send out their sentries. In the dark night, the soldiers gathered in circles to cook. They enjoyed the warm meal in the rain to replenish the nutrients their bodies lacked. Just when the meal was ready and everyone was about to eat, the sound of galloping horses approached from afar. When the Siamese soldiers at the front heard it, they were all in disbelief. They did not believe that the 5-star army would take the initiative to cause them trouble. What right did they have? Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the cavalry of the 5-star troop was really here. Just as some of the vigilant Siamese soldiers stood up, a group of black figures emerged from the darkness. Under the light of the bonfire, the gleaming silver broadswords slashed at the frightened Siamese soldiers. The Siamese soldiers were unprepared for the sudden attack and suffered a great loss. Most of them were chopped in half and turned into corpses before they could even hold their weapons. A few lucky ones turned around and fled. They led the Black Knights to another camp and repeated the previous attack. Yang Qindong had always been at the front of his team. His physical fitness was already very good. No one could beat him in terms of both strength and toughness. In addition, the White Dragon was the king of horses. With the combination of the two, once he rushed out, no one could catch up to him. Naturally, he took the responsibility of being the tip of the arrow. His appearance was like a golden needle that quickly pierced into a person's body. Wherever he went, the Siamese soldiers, whether armed or unarmed, soldiers or generals, were no match for him. They were all killed with a single slash of his saber and fell to the ground with hatred in their hearts. Quick, keep up with him. Ba Daojiang and Ping Yu pushed their horses to their limits, but they were barely able to keep up with Yang Qindong. This made them extremely anxious, and at the same time they used all of their strength. Every time their silver blades struck down, another soul would appear on the battlefield. Although there were only around 250 people under Yang Qindong's lead, everyone forgot about this fact. All they thought about was constantly moving forward, constantly killing the enemy and constantly killing the enemy. With such high morale, the cavalry of more than 200 men forced their way through 4 Siamese military camps, each of which had at least 1,000 soldiers. However, with the advantage in numbers, they could not fight back. They could only run with their instinct. After charging into the 5th camp, Yang Qindong finally felt a trace of weakness. The speed at which he swung his sword slowed down, allowing Ba Daojiang and Ping Yu, who were behind him, to catch up. Then the two of them shouted, "Sixth young master, we have charged into the 5th camp. We have completed our mission. We can retreat now." "It's already the 5th camp?" Yang Qindong smiled as he thought about the plan to retreat after charging into 3 enemy camps. Then he shouted, "The enemy is too easy to kill. They are completely defenseless. Let's charge into 1 more camp. No matter what the situation is, we will retreat. What do you think?" Even though Yang Qindong said it in a negotiating tone, his tone was firm. But Dao Jiang and Ping Yu could not say anything. They could only smile bitterly and follow behind Yang Chendong as they continued to charge forward. 2 hours later, Xiao Yining, the commander of the 5th Infantry Division, stood on a barren hill and looked into the distance. So much time had passed. Why had not a single shadow cavalry unit returned? Did something happen to them? Just as he was worrying, the sound of hooves could be heard from afar. Then the first batch of retreating units appeared. It was the 4th unit led by Dao Xiao. Their bodies reeked of blood, representing their achievements. When they retreated to the barren hill and saw that they were the first batch to retreat, he could not help but be shocked. 6th young master and the rest did not return? No, you are the first unit. Xiao Yining replied honestly. What? That won't do. I have to go and receive them. This result shocked Dao Xiao. He had already completed his mission to kill 3 enemy camps. That was why he had retreated. However, he had not seen a single unit return. This could only mean that they had completed their mission beyond their expectations. He hated himself for being too honest and obedient. He wanted to lead his unit out again. However, Xiao Yining took large strides forward and blocked Dao Zhao's warhorse. Oh, it is so dark. You might not be able to find them. If every team that returns has to go look for the others, when will that ever end? Listen to my advice. Stay here and observe the situation first before making a decision. Furthermore, the soldiers must be tired and thirsty. Rest and replenish your energy. Even though Xiao Yining was the commander of a division and was leading the Cold Vanguard division, his position was high. However, in front of the Black Knights in Longwei, he was still extremely courteous. He knew that the other party was only inferior to him in terms of rank. In terms of influence, he would never be able to catch up. These words left Dao Xiao speechless. He thought that he could continue to kill, but the soldiers must be tired. He nodded and said, "All right, then let's grab some food. If there is a change in the situation, we will still have to go out." All right. Hurry up and bring the prepared hot food." Seeing that his advice was effective, Xiao Yining couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and shouted loudly behind him. Not long after Dao Xiao, the leader of the 3rd unit, Qiu Vi, also returned with his men. He was also reeking of blood. Dao Xiao quickly ran over to ask about the results. When he found out that this unit had not only killed 3 but 4 battalions, he stomped his feet in regret. Not long after Qiu Vi returned, the leader of the 2nd unit, Beta Persei, also returned. He had killed 5 battalions. He thought that it was about time, but when he returned, he realized that the young master had not returned. He did not even want to eat and was about to turn around and rush back. However, he was stopped by Xiao Yining. "Second brother, even if your body is fine, you still have to consider the condition of the soldiers. You came back later than the other 2 units after killing 5 battalions. I'm sure the 6th young master must have killed more than 5 battalions. Why don't you eat something first and wait and see?" That's right, Chou Wu and Dao Xiao said. The starting point of departure was the same, and the speed of return was determined by the number of enemy battalions killed. In this case, it was very likely that the 6th young master would kill his way into the 6th battalion. In this case, the 6th young master's return should not be far away. All right. Beta Persei looked at the Dark Knight. He was also worried that he would not be able to find the young master if he went out now. He would also put his brothers in danger. Therefore, he decided to wait a little longer. This wait lasted for an hour. Beta Persei, who felt that a day was like a year, forced himself to drink a bowl of meat soup. Finally, he could not wait any longer. No, it's been so long and the young master still hasn't returned. Something must have happened. We can't wait any longer. Yes, we can't wait any longer. This time, even Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao could not sit still. According to the time, even if the 6th young master had killed 6 battalions, he should have returned long ago. However, he still had not returned. Could it be that he had killed more enemies? Or did something happen? When they thought of the latter, who could still sit still? First they were the Black Knights, then the Longwei. They were responsible for ensuring the absolute safety of the 6th young master. In a sense, they were equivalent to the emperor's personal army. Naturally, they were incomparably prestigious. However, this prestige was based on the fact that Yang Chendong was fine. If something really happened, they would not be able to bear the responsibility even if they all died 10 times over. Xiao Yining did not dare to stop them. After an extra hour, he had already lost his confidence. If it was not for the fact that he did not have a warhorse to ride, he would have asked to go out and fight. Men, each unit take out 200 Type 95 weapons and give them to the Black Cavalry. The only thing Xiao Yining could do was to donate the weapons. No matter what, it would be considered a contribution. Chapter 1033. Wait a minute. Just as Xiao Yining issued the task, Beta Persei, who was already on his horse, raised his middle finger and gestured for silence. Then on the quiet barren mountain, almost everyone heard the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground. It was getting closer and closer, becoming clearer and clearer. Young master's back. It must be the young master. Beta Persei couldn't help but cry out, his childlike face full of joy. It was Yang Qindong. At this moment his golden battle robe had long been dyed blood red. When he saw Beta Persei and the others at the foot of the barren mountain from afar, he squeezed out a smile even though he was a little tired. Haha, everyone must be anxious from waiting. This time I violated the military order, it's my responsibility. Yang Qindong had set an example by apologizing as soon as he arrived. With his status he had to admit that he had done something wrong. He believed that in the future, other officials, no matter how high their ranks were, would have to have an attitude when they did something wrong. Young master, are you okay? But at this moment, no one took his self-reflection seriously. Everyone was really concerned about whether Yang Qindong's body had any problems and whether he was injured. Ah, I'm fine. I just killed a little too ruthlessly. 2 of my brothers were injured, but fortunately I checked on them on the way. It's not fatal. They'll be fine after some rest. Yang Qindong grinned and laughed. This was the strength of the Shadow Cavalry. They were covered in protective armor and so were their warhorses. Unless they were trapped and died of exhaustion or stripped of their armor, it would be extremely difficult to kill them. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong dared to split them into 4 teams to counterattack with only 1,000 Shadow Cavalry. Facts also proved that there were no casualties in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th teams. Some were only injured by the shock. When they heard that Yang Qindong was fine and only 2 of his comrades were slightly injured, everyone laughed. Then Beta Persei couldn't help but ask curiously, "Young master, you came back so late. How many enemy camps did you break through?" Faced with this question that everyone was curious about, Yang Qindong didn't answer. Instead, he dismounted from his white dragon warhorse and went to find something to eat and drink. Yang Qindong didn't want to answer and no one dared to ask. However, Badao Jiang and Ping Yu, who were following behind him, didn't receive such treatment. Beta Persei and the others quickly surrounded them. In the end, the 2 couldn't stand the interrogation and answered the question. The 6th young master was so focused on killing that he didn't take it seriously even when we reminded him several times. Later, if it wasn't for the fact that the warhorse was carrying too much weight, he probably wouldn't have come back. Badao Jiang said casually, but he still didn't answer the question. For a moment, Beta Persei and the others were angry. They rolled up their sleeves and looked like they were really going to fight. Peng Yu was more reliable. He first smiled and then replied, 8th Battalion. What? 8th Battalion? Hearing this answer, Beta Persei and the others were stunned. Their 3 teams combined had only broken through 12 battalions. The 6th young master's team had broken through 8 battalions. Didn't this mean that he had completed nearly 300% of the mission? And that was the truth. When Yang Qindong saw that the Siamese army was unprepared, he went on a killing spree and broke through battalions one after another. Finally, he reached 8 battalions before returning. With a team of more than 200 people, he had broken through the Siamese army's 8,000 soldiers. Obviously, he had created another miracle. The 5-star army was shocked by Yang Qindong's excitement. Then there were sounds of surprise. The commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, did a rough calculation. The 4 teams together were equivalent to breaking through 20 battalions of the enemy. That was a total of 20,000 soldiers. The Siamese army had suffered such heavy losses and would not be able to recover for a while. So could his soldiers rest for the night? For this request, Yang Qindong waved his hand and approved it. Take the time to rest. The enemy needs time to prepare. But with such heavy losses, I'm afraid that the attack tomorrow morning will be even fiercer. Rest well for the big battle. Rest well for the big battle. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 5-star army shouted in unison. The morale of the 5-star army was high and the crowd was furious. Tong Si was burning with anger and could not suppress it. When he heard that in just 4 hours they had lost 20 battalions of soldiers, nearly 10,000 dead, countless injured and countless deserters, he could not believe his ears. During the day the 5-star army showed signs of weakness. There were even a few times when his soldiers were at the foot of a barren mountain. Victory was in sight. How could the enemy have the strength to retaliate? General, could it be that the enemy's reinforcements have arrived? You also know that if Yang Qindong is here, the other 5 element armies will definitely rush here like crazy. A deputy general also couldn't figure it out, so he made a guess. ***. I have already arranged countless scouts around the perimeter of the battlefield. Even if there are reinforcements, we should be the first to know. However, there is no news at all. Could it be that their reinforcements didn't come from the ground but from the sky? Tong De shouted angrily. This. The others in the main tent did not say anything. They could not explain this matter. Everything was up to General Tong Si. Tong Si could not figure it out. But his intuition told him that the 5-star army's counterattack was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Otherwise, they would not have stopped at 20 battalions. They would have killed their way to his main tent. In other words, he still had the advantage in numbers. If he wanted to win this battle, he could only continue with this advantage. All of you go to the battalions immediately and calm the soldiers down. We will launch the attack tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take Yang Qindong's life this time. Suing City, on top of the city wall. The deputy governor of Cambodia, Din Din Wei, and the Cambodian general, Dagan, were looking towards the southwest. After Yang Qindong left the city, no one dared to attack Suing City. In fact, in order to achieve an absolute advantage in numbers, the Siamese soldiers who were guarding the city were all mobilized. In other words, Suing City was really safe at this moment. Yang Qindong was indeed in danger. The sound of cannons had been heard since the night before. It had been 2 days and 2 nights. Although they were far away and could not see what the 5-star army had been through, the sounds of fighting and killing had not stopped. It was easy to imagine that the 5-star army was not having a good time. Yang Qindong had also been in danger. General Dagan, how many soldiers can we gather in the city? Din Din Wei looked into the distance for a long time and finally could not help but ask. Sai, Deputy Governor, I know what you mean, but we only have about 1,000 soldiers in the city and half of them are injured. If we rely on them, we can't even defend the city. If we really go out to help, the Siamese soldiers will attack the city at any time. If that's the case, I don't think the 6th young master wants to see. Dagan sighed. As a general, he certainly did not want to watch others fight. But with his current strength, there was nothing he could do. These words extinguished Ding Ding Wei's courage that had just arisen. So, we can only watch? No, didn't the 6th young master say that we have enough soldiers in the city? He wants us to prepare enough troops in the city to clean up the battlefield at any time and snatch the supplies that the enemy will leave behind. This is also a very important task. When Dagan said this, he felt a little lacking in confidence. The Siamese soldiers had mobilized more than 100,000 soldiers and reinforcements were still coming. It would be very difficult for Yang Qindong to escape, let alone defeat the enemy. Din Din Wei could hear the disappointment in Dagan's words. He said confidently, we have to believe in the 6th young master. He is a man who likes to create miracles. Besides, after his arrival, our people's lives have been better than before. Compared to His Majesty Boromir, he is more suitable to lead and lead us, isn't he? Yes, that's right, we need to mobilize now. We need to mobilize the people in the city. We just need to wait for 6th young master to win the battle and capture the captives. This. Dagan originally wanted to ask if this would work. But when he saw how serious Din Din Wei was, he nodded. Then let's go and prepare. 20 miles away from Golden Rim City, a cavalry team was coming. The leader was Major General Tian who usually had a cold face and was serious in speech and manner. After coming ashore from Baji Port, he led the world's #1 cavalry division and traveled day and night without rest. Even when they were eating, they had to eat while riding their horses. Finally, they arrived at Golden Rim City. However, it had been 2 days and 2 nights since the Siamese army besieged the 6th young master. How far is it from here to Suing City? Tian Hu asked Lu Duo, who was beside him as he rode forward. Commander, it is about 400 miles away. Lu Duo had already familiarized himself with the map before coming, so he answered without hesitation. It is still so far away. No, we are still too slow. Hearing that it would take more than a day, Tianhu shook his head and expressed his dissatisfaction. It is already very fast. After all, we still have a lot of things with us. Lu Duo explained after listening. The world's #1 cavalry division dominated the beginning city and the North Desert region. They were similar to the roaming cavalry. There was no fixed training ground at all. Often they would fight wherever they went. Especially when they encountered unknown cavalry, they would immediately enter the opportunity to train. Therefore, they usually brought a lot of things such as food and water. It should be known that a large part of the grassland was desert. If there was not enough water, it was easy to get hungry and thirsty, leading to a decline in combat strength. Chapter 1034. There was also the quiver. Compared to an ordinary cavalry that only had a quiver with 50 arrows, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry division had 20 quiver with 1,000 arrows. This was because they were used to doing things without supplies, so they had to be self-sufficient. In addition, there were clothes, shoes, hats, bows, extra sabers, and so on. Fortunately, each of them had 2 horses so they could carry such heavy loads. However, this greatly reduced their speed. Now that the 6th young master was in danger, as the closest reinforcements, the #1 cavalry division in the world had to rush over as quickly as possible. Even if they arrived 30 minutes earlier, they might be able to change many things. Leave 200 people in each division and lead the extra horses slowly. The rest of you should speed up. Other than the necessary weapons and rations, leave everything else behind. Our top priority is to rush over with all our might. Tianhu took a deep breath and immediately made a decision. Lu Duo only hesitated for a moment before giving a military salute. Then he began to pass down orders to the messenger behind him. Immediately, the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally had 10,000 people, was left with 800 people. At the same time, they also left behind 10,800 war horses and a bunch of supplies. Without any restraints, Tianhu, who had only brought rations for a day, acted as if he would either succeed or die for a righteous cause. He had already used his actions to tell everyone that they had to rush over to the location to rescue the 6th young master. Otherwise, they would run out of food first. The 9,200 cavalry troops advanced quickly. Everywhere they passed, clouds of smoke and dust would rise, giving people the feeling that they were riding on a cloud of dust. On the barren mountain, because of the sneak attack, they managed to obtain half a night to rest. When the sun rose the next day, the crazy attacks began again. As if considering the factor of long delays, Tongxi once again gave an iron order that they could only advance and not retreat. At the same time, the reward for killing Yang Chendong was increased from 10,000 silver taels to 20,000 silver taels. To an ordinary soldier, this was definitely a heaven-shaking sum. It was equivalent to being able to rise from the poor class to the upper class, and not having to worry about food and water for the rest of their lives. This also greatly increased the morale and enticement of the soldiers. Even though they knew that the 5-star army possessed extremely miraculous and formidable firearms, the soldiers were still as numerous as the clouds in the sky. Often, after a batch of soldiers was shot down, a new batch would appear immediately. From the looks of it, if the soldiers of the late Qing dynasty had such morale, they wouldn't have allowed the 8-nation alliance to invade. Facing such an attack, 5th Master Lu was also undergoing the harshest test. Their ammunition consumption was too fast, and without enough supplies they were already stretched thin. Of course, the most important thing was that the enemy's charge was too fierce. Many of the muskets had to be used continuously, and the chances of them having problems were greatly increased. For example, misfiring, jamming, or overloading of the musket, causing it to not be able to fire, occurred repeatedly. Originally, 5th Master Lu only had 1 musket each and did not have many spare muskets. Thus, he had no choice but to pick up a bayonet and go into battle bare-chested. It must be said that the Lung Feng soldiers were not bad with their muskets, and their close combat abilities were also very strong. Once they were back-to-back and formed a 3-by-3 formation, the 3 of them could easily kill enemies several times their number. Unfortunately, the number of enemies they faced this time was too much, and it was not just several times their number. After 3 days of battle, the Siamese soldiers had already suffered tens of thousands of casualties, which was a few thousand times the number of casualties of the 5-star army. However, when the muskets could no longer display their advantage, the number of casualties began to decrease. At around 10 in the morning, the firearms started to have problems on a large scale. By the time they switched to close combat at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a total of 3 hours and 3 hours had passed. The number of casualties in the 5th Army had exceeded 1,000. What was even more frightening was that this number was still increasing. If it wasn't for Yang Qindong bringing the Black Knights and the Dragon Guards to join in and kill the enemy from time to time, the barren mountain might not have been able to be defended. Such a loss had never happened since the establishment of the Lung Feng army. However, no one complained. When they became the glorious soldiers of the Lung Feng army, they were destined to bear the same amount of pressure. For example, in the face of danger, they were expected to face death with equanimity. Use grenades when there are more people and bayonets when there are fewer people. Those who can use muskets, please be prepared to cooperate. Please don't be a hero, don't fight alone, and don't casually save people, 5th Master Lu Division Xiao Yining said as he almost cried. Just now he didn't know how many heroic soldiers had taken the initiative to charge at the enemy, and then fought one against many hundreds and finally died on the battlefield. He also saw that in order to save these lone heroes, many soldiers had charged into the enemy camp like moths to a flame. After entering, they never came out again. These were all good warriors. Even in the face of death, they did not flinch. He was happy to be their commander, but at the same time he was sad for their sacrifice. However, war was cruel to begin with. Once on the battlefield, one had to be prepared to die on the battlefield. Perhaps this was the fate of some soldiers. However, as a division commander, it was better to have one less person die. It could be said that the Lung Feng army had undergone all kinds of training in the past, including winning with fewer people and bullying with more people. However, they really didn't have much training in using cold weapons to fight with fewer people. Perhaps everyone subconsciously thought that this kind of thing wouldn't happen. Thus, when faced with such a situation, there was some confusion. Division Commander Xiao Yining shouted at the top of his lungs. Under the cooperation of the other commanders, 5th Master Lu Division began to withdraw their forces. At the same time, they also gave up their territory on the outskirts of the barren mountain. Standing on the barren mountain, Yang Qindong didn't stop this from happening. This was because he knew that 5th Master Lu Division wasn't giving up on the battle. Instead, they were welcoming the arrival of a greater victory with a better posture. At 2 in the afternoon, the enemy's large-scale attack began again. From afar, the figures were densely packed. Based on a rough estimate, there were at least 30 to 40,000 soldiers. They relied on their numbers and shouted as they charged forward. In the face of the locust-like enemy, the remaining 6,000 soldiers of the 5th Division were not afraid at all. First, they threw out the last grenades in their hands, forcefully blasting a hole in the enemy's formation. Then they began a frenzied counterattack. With companies as units, they stabbed forward like many sharp knives, forcefully suppressing the enemy's advance. Get on your horses and attack. Seeing this scene, Yang Qindong knew that it was time for him to counterattack. He immediately leaped onto the white dragon horse and rushed out in a blood-red battle robe. Beside him and behind him were 1,000 Black Knights and Dragon Guards. They also raised their steel swords and rushed towards the enemy while shouting and yelling. Facing the densely packed enemy, the cavalry's charging force was limited. If they were caught in the crossfire, they would become the target of public criticism. There would be no possibility of retreat or even survival. But at this moment, no one showed any intention of retreating. To be a member of the Black Cavalry, one had to be extremely loyal. They usually enjoyed the respect of others, and now, it was time for them to pay the same price. 1,000 Black Cavalry Dragon Guards charged into the enemy's camp. First, they killed their way into the enemy's camp. Then they were scattered and surrounded. Finally, their armor was riddled with holes. The so-called invulnerable black armor had served its purpose. It could no longer protect the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards, and they became the targets of the Siamese soldiers. The sun gradually set in the west and the sky finally turned dark again. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio. The arrival of night hindered the Siamese army's attack. Yang Qindong and his men could finally take a breather. When they returned to the barren hills and were panting, new casualties were reported. 5th Master Lu Division had less than 4,000 soldiers left. Even the Black Cavalry had less than 800 men left. Even the Black Cavalry had lost more than 200 men. This showed the cruelty of the battle. Their deaths will not be in vain. Their deaths laid the foundation for our greater victory. Their deaths were worthy and honorable. Yang Qindong said and did so at the same time. He requested for a list of all the soldiers who died in the battle to be given to him. All of them would be treated as martyrs so that their families and loved ones would be taken care of. To paraphrase Yang Qindong's words, we cannot let the heroes bleed and shed tears. We cannot let their souls not rest in peace. We must let them pass away peacefully without any worries or scruples. Long live the sixth young master. More than 4,000 soldiers knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yang Qindong, to the god in their hearts. Morale was still high. Many soldiers showed an attitude of facing death as they waited for the next bloody battle to come. At that time they might fall and never get up again. But they had nothing to regret. This was their fate. There was nothing to worry about because everything had been arranged for them by the sixth young master. The soldiers were not afraid of death, but some were afraid of Yang Qindong's death. Zhou Xian and Beta Persei walked up to Yang Qindong together and made a request with a serious expression. In the next battle they would try their best to charge and kill their way out of the encirclement. Break out. That's impossible. After understanding the meaning of the two, Yang Qindong shook his head with a bitter smile. If he knew that Yang Qindong would have such an attitude, Zhou Xian would not have cared about his status and said firmly, "Sixth young master, we are not asking for your opinion. We are informing you of this decision. Are you going to force me out?" Yang Qindong saw that Zhou Xian was serious, so he pretended to be angry and his face darkened. Chapter 1035. Don't blame Commander Zhou. This is also the opinion of all of us in Long Wei. Our duty is to protect your absolute safety. Now that there is danger, the young master must leave. There is no room for discussion. Beta Persei spoke up. He who had always followed Yang Qindong's lead, finally became the bad guy for once and offered his opinion. Since Beta Persei had made such a statement, Yang Qindong knew that it would be difficult to refuse. A thought came to his mind and he asked, "Since we are breaking out of the encirclement, where should we go? Now that Wang Shan is also injured and the radio is damaged, we don't know where our troops are and where the danger is. Once we rush out, what should we do if we get surrounded again? At that time, our reinforcements won't even know where we are. What should they do then? Won't it be even more dangerous?" When the battle was at its cruelest, the telegrapher Wang Shan also joined the battle. However, because his strength was limited, he was killed and carried back. Not only that, but the radio was also damaged and could not be used for a while. Yang Qindong could naturally solve all of this. For example, he could take out another radio from the warehouse and then send a report to the outside to inquire about the situation. However, he did not do so. He also wanted to see what the other armies would choose to do when they did not hear from him. This was often the best time to test people's hearts. He did not expect that this method of testing others would become an excuse. It was an excellent excuse to not be forced to break out of the encirclement. Beta Persei and Zhou Xian only thought about how to ensure Yang Qindong's safety and did not think about what to do after they got out. Now that they were asked this question, they did not know what to say. However, Yang Qindong still had a relaxed smile on his face and said, "Well, you have to believe in yourselves and our army. I promise that as long as we can hold on, the reinforcements will arrive by tomorrow at the latest. At that time it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength." "The reinforcements will arrive tomorrow?" Beta Persei and Zhou Xian looked shocked. At the same time they also had a question to ask. How did Yang Qindong find out about the radio station without it? However, they wouldn't say anything like that, nor did they dare to say anything. "Yes, the reinforcements will arrive tomorrow," Yang Qindong said as if there was something important. Of course he wouldn't say that he was just guessing. In fact, he didn't know where the reinforcements were. Everything was just a guess. He just wanted to cheer everyone up so that they wouldn't lose hope. If the reinforcements did not arrive the next day, that would be easy too. They could just push it back by one day. After all, the effect of the pep talk would take effect. Others did not know that this was all a guess. Looking at Yang Qindong's confident demeanor, Beta Persei and Zhou Xian retreated with joy. Then the news that reinforcements would arrive after a day of defending spread, and morale rose again. Tongxi did not know when the reinforcements from the 5-star army would arrive. However, he had a feeling that they were not far away. It had been more than 10 days since the attack on Suing City and the Barren Mountain. The 5-star army should have made their move by now. If he couldn't take down Yang Qindong, he was afraid that he would lose this great opportunity. Not only that, he might fall into a passive position. The number of 5-star army in the Barren Mountain had been determined. There were less than 10,000 people. However, he had led hundreds of thousands of troops to fight for many days. So far, the number of dead and injured had reached 70 to 80,000, but they still hadn't been taken down. A 5-star army of nearly 10,000 people was already so powerful. What if another one came? He didn't dare to think about what the consequences would be. Pass down the order. Have a good rest tonight and attack with all your strength tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take down Yang Qindong. Also, all the battalions must be prepared for a sneak attack. Once the enemy comes, they won't be able to return. Tongxi didn't choose to attack at night. He was worried that once the 5-star army broke through in the dark, their vision would be affected. In order to not let Yang Qindong escape, he had to make the decision to let the enemy rest for another night. Yang Qindong, who was at the foot of the Barren Mountain, didn't know that the Siamese soldiers wouldn't attack tonight. Late into the night, there was still no movement from the enemy. Yang Qindong finally said, "Did you see that? The enemy has already expected us to break through, so they didn't choose to attack at night. Okay, now everyone can have a good rest." Beta Persei and Xiao Yining both had bitter expressions. They knew that if they broke through during the day, the danger would be greater. After all, the Barren Mountain had been completely surrounded. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that not even a bird could fly out. Even so, they could only place their hopes on the reinforcements that would arrive tomorrow. Will there really be reinforcements? Who will they be? This question appeared in the hearts of many people, but no one asked because it was tantamount to questioning the 6th young master's words. This was a political issue. Yang Qindong leaned against a boulder and slept for the night. In his dream, he saw his wives and little Lele. He saw little Lele happily hugging his neck and kissing him on the cheek. He also saw First Madame Hu Yen, who was already pregnant. When he carefully leaned his head over, he first heard the faint sound of the baby breathing. Then it became louder and louder until it became a very loud, dong 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 trembling sound. It seemed that at this moment the earth was trembling with it. Young master. While he was in a daze, Beta Persei's voice suddenly sounded and then his body shook. Yang Qindong instinctively opened his eyes, and Beta Persei's wide-eyed face appeared in his line of sight. Seeing that Yang Qindong had woken up, Beta Persei said happily, "Young master, you're really amazing. The reinforcements are here, the reinforcements are here." The reinforcements are here? Yang Qindong was also shocked by this news, and when he wanted to say something, the sound of armored horses trampling on the ground entered his ears. He finally knew where the sound in his dream came from. It was precisely because of this that Yang Qindong's eyes widened. How many reinforcements are here? Which team is it? I don't know yet and I can't see clearly, but it should be the reinforcements. Young master, look, the Siamese army that was about to attack has become chaotic. Beta Persei pointed to the distance at the foot of the Barren Mountain and said reasonably. Binoculars. Yang Qindong said as he took the binoculars from Qiu Vi, the captain of the First Guard Company, and looked at them. Ah, the reinforcements are here and they seem to be very strong. In this case, immediately inform the entire army to prepare for a full counterattack. We need to attack from the center and attack from both sides. Looking through the binoculars, Yang Qindong saw the commotion in the enemy camp, and at this moment he was extremely excited. He did not think that the Siamese army still needed to put on such a show at this time. Faced with only half the number of people and his condition was not very good, they could attack with just a burst of energy. It was meaningless to put on such a show now. In fact, the reinforcements were indeed here, and it was the 1st Cavalry Division that had arrived. After removing all the burden, Tian, who led the main force of the 1st Cavalry Division, 9,200 people, and traveled more than 400 miles in one day and one night, arriving at the Barren Mountain outside Suing City. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten, Tian, who gave everyone an hour to rest, and then said to the 5 regimental commanders, "If there are no major changes, the 6th young master is on the Barren Mountain in the distance." This battle will be the time for the 1st Cavalry Division to show the strongest combat power. I hope everyone can do their best because all the 5-star army is watching us, because the 6th young master is on the barren mountain watching us. Is everyone confident? It was only 1 day and 1 night of continuous travel. This was not the first time for the 1st Cavalry Division under the heavens. There was even a time when they traveled continuously for more than 3 days and 3 nights. But when faced with an enemy they still did not rest and won in a spurt of energy. This time they were going to help the 6th young master, so there was no possibility of them backing down. It was mentioned before that the first 3 regimental commanders of the 1st Cavalry Division were all captives. To be able to hold such a high position, it was all because of Yang Qindong's magnanimity. Even if it was to repay his kindness, everyone had to perform well this time. In other words, even without Tianhu's words, they would still do their best to perform. There are too many enemies, don't split up. Later, all of you will gather in a fan-shaped charge. At the same time, pay close attention to the position of the enemy's commander. If you find anything, immediately notify us. Tianhu knew the principle of capturing the leader first to capture the bandits. Yes. The 5 regimental commanders agreed without hesitation. Then they turned around to notify the other regimental commanders, and at the same time replenished their food supplies. At this moment all the food they brought was swallowed. They knew very well that they did not know when the next battle would end, and they did not know when their next meal would be. Now they were all prepared to not return until they won. Half an hour later the 9,200 cavalrymen were ready to charge. Under the command of their division commander Tianhu, they suddenly appeared and charged diagonally into the battlefield, charging towards the unprepared Siamese infantry. In history there was a saying that the Jurchens were invincible. However, when they faced the 1st Cavalry Division, when they appeared and launched a frenzied attack, the Siamese soldiers were stunned by the cavalry that appeared out of nowhere. In the past few days the number of 5-star army soldiers on the barren hills had decreased, but they had also paid a heavy price for it. In the face of the most advanced continuous fire rifles, the others were afraid that they wouldn't be able to avoid them. However, under General Tong's orders and the threat of the inspectors, they had no choice but to use their bodies to block the bullet holes. This made them very puzzled and angry. Now that the 5-star army cavalry had appeared behind them, the first thing they charged at was the inspector brigade, which gave them hope of escaping. Chapter 1036. Although the reward was high, one had to be alive to claim it. After witnessing the power of the 5-star army, the desire to claim the reward faded. It was only because they had no other choice but to make this choice. Now that they had a chance to save their lives, the Siamese soldiers who were already demoralized, turned their swords around and ran away. As they ran, faced with the sudden appearance of the world's number 1 cavalry division, most of the Siamese soldiers did not even have the courage to fight. They only knew that the only way to survive had been opened. All they needed to do now was to follow the flow and escape with their lives. With such a mindset and such a general trend, the number 1 cavalry division in the world didn't encounter any resistance at all. There were even many places where the enemy retreated like the tide before they even arrived. The speed at which these people fled was actually not much slower than their war horses. What should we do? The 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang was riding beside Tianhu. How about this, Regiment Commander Bai? You lead your men to the barren mountains and report our plan to the 6th young master. I will lead the others to continue the pursuit and try to kill the enemy's general. Tianhu hesitated for a moment before he spoke. Okay, I will do it now. 4th Regiment, come with me. Bai Shuang nodded and left with the order. Leaving Tianhu behind, Bai Shuang led the rest of the cavalry and continued to charge forward. During the process they kept waving their swords and killing the enemy. Blood and broken limbs were scattered all over the place. On the barren mountain, Bai Shuang arrived with 1,900 cavalrymen. From afar he saw Yang Qindong riding on a white dragon waiting for the battle. Immediately he leaped off his horse and ran a few steps towards Yang Qindong. Student Bai Shuang is late. Sorry for startling you. Bai Shuang was once a student of Yang Qindong's academy. He was not personally taught by Yang Qindong, so he could not be called a teacher. However, it was not wrong to call him Dean. Haha, it's Regiment Commander Bai. Has the world's 1st Division arrived? After seeing White Shuang, The last trace of suspicion that the Siamese soldiers were putting on an act disappeared. The world's first cavalry division would never cooperate with the enemy to put on a show. Headmaster Teacher Tian is leading the main force of the army to kill the enemy. He has sent a student to protect the headmaster. Bai Shuang's voice rang out again. Good, you guys are very good. I'm very pleased that you're fast enough. However, you've already killed your way out, so how can I just watch from the sidelines? Men follow the young master and charge out. Beta Persei fire the red signal flare. It's time to inform Ding Ding Wei and General De Nha. Finally, the reinforcements had arrived. Now it was time for him to shed his blood. At this moment, Yang Qindong felt his entire body brimming with energy. A red signal flare immediately rose into the air, causing Ding Ding Wei and De N, who were waiting for news on the tower, to see it. Immediately, the 20,000 corpse-collecting soldiers in the city opened the city gate and rushed toward the battlefield. At the same time, on top of the barren hill, except for the 500 who were too seriously injured to move, more than 4,000 people rushed out and cooperated with Commander Bai Shuang. This group of more than 6,000 people headed towards the Siamese camp from another direction. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was still anxiously waiting for the arrival of good news. However, what he received was not news of the barren mountain being conquered or Yang Qindong being captured. Instead, he received news of the arrival of the 5-star army's reinforcements. As soon as they appeared, they defeated the main force of the Siamese army and were now heading toward the main tent. What's going on? What's going on? How can the reinforcements of the 5-star army arrive so quickly? Tong Si shouted hysterically. At this moment, it was obvious that he did not want to believe that all of this was true. However, the truth was the truth. It would not be false just because one did not want to believe it. After a few captains rushed into the main tent to report the battle situation, Tong Si finally knew that this time they had really lost. Not only did he lose the opportunity to capture Yang Qindong, but it was also very likely that he would be defeated because of this. If he had escaped a little slower, his life would have been in danger. Retreat. In desperation, Tong Si had no choice but to issue such a military order. What Tong Si did not know was that the generals below him were already afraid of the 5-star army. According to them, the 5-star army's reinforcements numbered in the tens of thousands. Therefore, it was impossible for them to defeat them. Otherwise, with Tong Si's 60,000 soldiers, it was completely possible for him to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division. Once an army lost its fighting spirit, it was no better than an organized group of civilians. When the order to retreat was given, the camp immediately became chaotic. Everyone fought to leave, and all the generals asked the ration officer for food. Food had to be eaten mouthful by mouthful, roads had to be taken step by step, and tasks had to be done one by one. When faced with so many generals asking for food, the ration officer was confused. When he strongly urged everyone to line up and distribute the food, saying that it would take at least 1 to 3 days to complete, the generals could not accept it. Some of them even started to fight for the food. Before they met the enemy, the Siamese army was already in a mess. It was a pity that Tong Si had already retreated, so he didn't have the ability to distribute or preside over the overall situation. When the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division arrived at the main camp, all they saw was a mountain of rations that had yet to be distributed. Leave 200 men to guard the granary. The rest of you follow me to kill the enemy. After unexpectedly obtaining these rations, Tian, who didn't show much joy on his face. His target was the enemy's commander, Tong Si. As long as he captured this person, this battle would be considered complete in his eyes. The 1st Cavalry Division continued their pursuit. Along the way, all the enemies they encountered surrendered. Very few people had the courage to fight. As a result, the entire battlefield was filled with scenes of the Siamese soldiers surrendering. Fortunately, Ding Ding Wei and De N arrived quickly and took over the job, preventing the situation from becoming even more chaotic. From this point alone, it was clear that Yang Qindong had foresight. It seemed that he had expected this scene a few days ago. While Tian, who was advancing bravely, Yang Qindong arrived at the battlefield with more than 6,000 soldiers. Without the supervision of the Inspector Brigade, the Siamese soldiers who had been charging ferociously were now in a state of disarray. They were no longer as brave as before. Instead, they knelt down and threw down their weapons to surrender. Faced with these people who were no longer resisting, Yang Qindong did not give the order to kill them. Instead, he put away their weapons and sent people to watch over them. This was a job that could allow him to take in many captives. This greatly slowed down his progress and caused him to lose sight of Tong Xi's fleeing figure. The 1st Cavalry Division also encountered the same problem. There were too many Siamese soldiers surrendering along the way. If these people were not controlled, who knew if they would escape back to Siam and become soldiers again? "Commander, what should we do?" 1st Regiment Commander Teimu-er looked at the ground full of captives and asked worriedly. "Stop the pursuit and clean up the battlefield." Although he was hesitant, Tian Hu finally gave the order. He could not ignore the tens of thousands of captives in front of him. If these people caused any disasters, he would become a sinner. Tong Xi never expected that the ferocious 5-star army would have to give up the pursuit due to the large number of captives. This allowed him to successfully escape from Cambodia and return to Siam. It was said that along the way he encountered nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers who rushed to reinforce him. They were all persuaded to return. Tong escaped, but even more soldiers were forced to surrender because they didn't have war horses. In order to preserve their lives, they were forced to surrender. According to the statistics after the battle, there were more than 50,000 captives in this battle. There were also countless military supplies and provisions. The battle to defend Suing City and the danger of being surrounded by barren hills was finally resolved. It seemed like they had effectively blocked the attack of the Siamese army and the 5-star army had turned the tables. However, in Yang Qindong's view, this was far from the end. This was just the beginning. In front of the city gates of Suing City, there were corpses covered in white cloth. A total of 4,854 soldiers of the 5th Division and the Black Knights had died. At this moment they were all lying here. Many of them could not be found for various reasons. The only things that were covered were the items they used daily. Revenge! 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 The entire city gate was filled with shouts. They were all soldiers of the 5th Division. This time they had lost half of their division and were almost crippled. Everyone was suppressing the anger in their hearts. There were less than 800 Black Knights and Dragon Guards left. They stood to the left and right of Yang Qindong. None of them made a sound, but from their eyes, which revealed their armor, they were filled with intense killing intent. It was obvious that they were also extremely sad at this moment. "Good, then we will take revenge. Men, bring the prisoners here," Yang Qindong said in accordance with the soldier's voice. After the order was given, 4,854 Siamese soldiers walked out under the escort of the 1st Cavalry Division. These people were all prisoners of war and they were the kind that did not admit defeat. Even in the prison camp, they were still shouting about their identity as Siamese soldiers. They were still shouting that one day when they returned to the army, they would come back to Cambodia and teach the 5-star army a lesson. Yang Qindong didn't have time to do their ideological work. He didn't even mention the matter of re-education through labor. It just so happened that a large memorial service was going to be held for the dead comrades. These people were put to use. They were tied up with ropes one by one and brought out like sugar-coated haws. There were nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners outside the city. There were hundreds of thousands of people in Suing City who watched this scene. They watched as the 4,854 prisoners of war were brought out. They watched as Beta Persei used his naturally loud voice to recite the names of the dead comrades. Chapter 1037. There were nearly 5,000 names and it would take some time to recite all of them. Even though Yang Er's speed was not slow, it still took him 4 hours. During this time, there was no other sound outside the city except for the sound of the wind. Everyone was listening attentively, as if every name that was called out was imprinted in their hearts. When the last name was read out in front of everyone, Yang Qindong raised his right hand and said loudly, "Invading without a reason, a life for a life. Today these people are sentenced to death and will be executed immediately. Guards, kill. Kill." More than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division shouted in unison. Kill. Nearly 800 black cavalry soldiers shouted in unison. Kill. 10,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division shouted in unison. Kill. More than 200,000 people on the city gate tower shouted in unison. The sound of killing shook the heavens and nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners trembled in fear. Some of the more timid ones could no longer stand and fell to the ground. Under the sound of killing, 454 Siamese soldiers were executed. Their mouths were gagged in advance, so when they died they did not make a single sound. No one knew if they had admitted their mistake at this moment, or if they wanted to continue cursing. But these were no longer important. What was important was that they were dead and could no longer pose any threat to the 5-star army. Since ancient times, many people had said that killing prisoners of war was an ominous thing. But this time when Yang Qindong ordered the prisoners to be killed, no one made a different sound. Firstly, they were not prisoners at all. They were just enemies who had temporarily lost their ability to fight. Secondly, the souls of the 5th Division, especially the Black Cavalry, had to be avenged. These people should have died on the battlefield long ago. It was not a bad thing to make use of them. The machete fell and 4,054 heads fell to the ground. Nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners had completely lost their will to fight. At this moment they suddenly understood how precious life was and how lucky they were. With the deaths of these people, the 5-star army became even more famous. Everyone saw the attitude of the 5-star army towards the dead. It was said that not only the direct troops of the 5-star army, but also the Cambodian soldiers who died in the battle and the civilians of Suing City who participated in the resistance against the enemy received a handsome pension. It was said that Bugnam of Zhou Xian had promised that the families of these martyrs would be given jobs. In other words, he was not only responsible for the dead but also for the living. As soon as the news came out, the number of people who signed up to join the army in Cambodia increased by several times. Many young men were still complaining that the appearance of the 5-star army had broken the peace of their lives. However, when they saw the attitude of Yang Qindong towards the civilians of Suing City, their mentality changed. They realized that Bugnam of Zhou Xian really treated them as his own people. He was really working hard for them to have a better life in the future. On top of this, there was only one more condition, which was to respect the Han people. So what? When did ordinary people have the final say? When did they ever enjoy real freedom? There was only one more Han Chinese above them. As long as they acknowledged this point, they would be able to live a better life and obtain more freedom. So why not? No one liked being born inferior. However, when the general trend was like this, there was nothing they could do to change it. In such an environment, being a soldier to defend the country could give them a new hope. They even had the opportunity to raise their status and bring glory to their ancestors. So, what reason did they have not to do it? In fact, as early as the moment the Phnom Penh dynasty became the province of Cambodia, some policies about Xianxia had been spread. However, most people did not believe it. Today, Yang Qindong used facts to teach everyone a lesson. This kind of doubtful thoughts finally disappeared, allowing more people to see the difference between the 5-star army and making more people envious. There were also more people who launched practical actions and began to sign up for enlistment. Ding Ding Wei and D'en told the good news to Yang Qindong. Then they looked forward to it. They were happy about the change in the people's views. Although they were former officials of the Phnom Penh dynasty, they could still see who treated the people better. Yang Qindong really wanted to let the people under his rule live a happier life. With this, they should support him. The reason why they looked forward to it was because they were worried that Yang Qindong would not allow these ambitious young people to join the army. After all, the 5-star army paid attention to the elite route. It had always been the quality of the soldiers rather than the quantity. It was also possible to refuse these people to join the army. However, this would greatly reduce their enthusiasm, which would increase the difficulty of managing them in the future. Under their expectant gazes, Yang Qindong pondered for a moment before giving his answer. Since they are so hot-blooded, how can we hurt their hearts? Then let's arrange for an assessment. If the conditions permit, and if there are no problems with identity and background, they can join the army. Yang Qindong actually agreed, which naturally made Ding Ding Wei and D'en happy. But then there was another problem. D'en quickly said, "Sixth young master, this time there are many people who signed up for the army. Not only Suing City, but many young people of the right age in many towns nearby. If they pass the assessment and political review, can they all join the army?" Of course. Yang Qindong did not understand what D'en meant. On the other hand, Ding Ding Wei quickly said, "Sixth young master, it's like this. This time there are a lot of people and there should be a lot of people who pass the assessment. If they all join the army, then the military strength of Cambodia will naturally increase by several times, so the financial pressure will naturally be great. It doesn't matter. As long as they are physically qualified and willing, we can accept them. But we have to explain to them in advance that Cambodia alone does not need so many soldiers. They will have a new place to go in the future. As long as we are prepared, we can accept as many as we want. In this battle, Yang Qindong saw the drawbacks of insufficient military strength. Although he had this feeling before with the elite route, even if the enemy had a large number of soldiers, what could they do? They would still be defeated by him. But this time, in the face of the sudden attack of the Siamese army, the lack of military strength was finally revealed. Yang Qindong finally understood that sometimes, it was not enough to have a good number of soldiers. It was the truth that ants could kill an elephant. A small country like Siam gave him so much pressure. If he wanted to conquer the West in the future and occupy a larger area of land, how could he do it without enough military strength? If that was the case, he would just recruit soldiers. Other forces could support so many soldiers, so how could Xianxia not be able to do it? Out of consideration for the future, Yang Qindong agreed to the expansion of the military. Not only that, but he also sent a message to several other provinces. He knew very well that it wouldn't take long for the news of Cambodia province's recruitment to spread out. By then, the men from other provinces would inevitably ask for such a request. Instead of waiting for them to ask for instructions, it was better to just let it go. He wanted to see how many soldiers he could gather with his forces. Just like that, the matter of conscription was settled. As usual, he only sent a telegram to the Crimson City Lord Manor and the military to state the facts. This clearly showed his attitude. I'm only informing you, not asking for your opinion. Just do as you're told. The recruitment was handed over to Ding Ding Wei and Dagan, who were familiar with the local environment. In Suing City, Yang Qindong received Lu Zhuo, the commander of the new 1st Cavalry Division, who had just arrived. Yang Qindong did not have to be polite to this old subordinate. After learning that Lu Zhuo's condition was stable and there were no symptoms of acclimatization, he said, "Since there is no problem with the army, then go and prepare. We will set off in 2 days. It is time to seek justice from Siam." The king of Siam was in Bangkok. General Tong had already fled in defeat. However, he had already lost his freedom the moment he entered the royal capital. He was captured by the king's guards, who had been waiting here for a long time, and locked up in prison. This time Siam King Ilichi believed Tong's words. He sent an army to reinforce the eastern front. He even sent out the few cannons he had. However, in the end he did not manage to capture Yang Qindong, but the news of the army's defeat. Since the matter had failed, someone had to take responsibility for it. Tong naturally became the culprit. For this matter, Iliqui found Prime Minister Hammond and personally announced his decision to behead Tong Si. According to him, if a general lost a battle, he had to be punished, especially when the 5-star army's counterattack was imminent. If he did not deal with Tong, the other generals would not do their best. In the end, they would lose the battle and flee back to the capital. Hamad had a different view on the king's order. From his point of view, when the two armies were at war, it was not auspicious to kill one's general. It would only disappoint the other generals. But since it was the king's order, he had to obey. Therefore, he arranged for someone to go to the dungeon and announce that Tong would be locked up and executed after the battle. From his point of view, since it had to be done, it was best to delay it as much as possible and not let the bad news spread. Tong, who was only one step away from success, was locked up in the dungeon and waiting to be executed after the battle. If he had known this would happen, it would be hard to say if he would have escaped back to the royal city. What Tong didn't expect was that even though he was about to die, the 5-star army didn't let him off. He fainted after consuming a meal, and when he opened his eyes, he was already out of the dungeon. He couldn't believe that someone would spend a huge sum of money to buy him out of the dungeon. Chapter 1038. The person said that he was General Tong's family, and they were willing to exchange him for someone of similar stature. He was just a dying man. When the prison guard saw the large amount of gold and silver, he handed him over without much thought. After all, he was going to die anyway, so no one would pay attention to him. However, they did not know that this was the beginning of the disaster for Siam. Everything started with Yang Qindong's telegram reprimanding the intelligence department. The The Siamese army split into two groups and marched towards Cambodia to intimidate Laos. The five-star army actually didn't notice such an important military intelligence. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong scolded Yang San in the telegram for being useless. If he couldn't do it, then he should find someone capable to do it. Feeling Yang Chendong's anger, Yang San sent a secret telegram to Golden Rooster, who was in charge of the situation in Southeast Asia. However, this telegram was like a stone thrown into the sea. Helplessly, they had to send someone to investigate. Finally, they received news that Wu Gui, who was temporarily in charge of Sky Sparrow, had been captured by the Siamese army. He was nicknamed Golden Rooster and his real name was Wu Gui. Just like the Great Ming Dynasty had the Genie Guards and the East Faction Guards, and the Five-Star Army had the Ministry of State Security and the CIA, Siam also had its own intelligence organization, and they had found Wu Gui's location in advance. It was in an inconspicuous courtyard in Bangkok. Siam beat them at their own game. They did not take him down immediately. Instead, under the instructions of Prime Minister Hamad, they only watched him and did not alert the enemy. When the Siam army was preparing for war, Wu Gui, nicknamed Golden Rooster, was gathering his subordinates for a meeting. The Siam army broke in and captured him. They killed 7 members of the intelligence department on the spot, including Golden Rooster. Because the matter was done secretly, and the key members of the intelligence department who knew about Golden Rooster's whereabouts were either dead or captured, the security department did not know about this at all. It was not until Yang Chendong's telegram that they could not contact him that they sent someone to investigate. Only then did they know everything. The intelligence network of the Ministry of State Security in Siam was wiped out. When the news reached Chichen City, 5th Madame Su Maner, who was in charge of the CIA, felt that her opportunity had arrived. Since the establishment of the CIA, although it had done some things, its contributions were not very great. The reason was that the intelligence network of the Security Bureau had been established long ago. At this time, it was not easy for the CIA to insert a rod into it. Not only did they have to face the obstruction of enemy intelligence departments, but they also had to be suppressed by the Ministry of State Security. That's right, it was true that Su Maner was Yang Chendong's 5th madam, but Yang San was a servant who had followed Yang Chendong for many years. He was extremely trusted and valued. When it came to intelligence, he was naturally unwilling to give in. For the sake of the 5th madam, he had already shown enough respect by not directly suppressing the CIA. It was very difficult for the CIA, which was established late and had lost the initiative, to gain any achievements. As the person behind the scenes, Su Maner had been looking for an opportunity to make a breakthrough. Finally, the opportunity had come. The incident in Siam made her feel that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. Immediately, she sent out a very clean female intelligence member nicknamed Xianxia to secretly go to the capital of Siam. According to Su Maner's intention, Xianxia's arrival was to investigate more of the Siam army's movements, as well as whether or not she could analyze their next move. After Xianxia arrived, she learned that General Tong had returned to the capital through buying information with a large sum of money. As such, she immediately bribed someone to be a spy in the prison, wanting to keep an eye on this General Tong. Xianxia had a feeling that the 6th young master would not spare this person. Then his every move had to be carefully monitored. What she did not expect was that the king of Siam was so decisive and actually gave the order to execute him after the war. Since there was no chance to kill this person on the battlefield, Xianxia had the idea that she could not let him go. Thus, she spent a large sum of money to exchange him in the name of Tong's family. After taking down Tong in this way, Xianxia reported the matter. In her opinion, it was just a trivial matter. However, she did not expect that this telegram would be sent to Yang Chendong. The original intention was for Su Maner to ask how she wanted to punish the culprit. In Yang Chendong's eyes, his eyes could not help but light up. You must hide him well. If it is not safe, kill him on the spot. In short, do not leave any traces behind. Try your best to deny this matter to the outside world. I have great use for it. After sending this telegram, Yang Chendong immediately sent another telegram to Luo Pu, the commander of the 2nd Army, who had already made preparations to send out troops in Wanxiang City. He allowed him to send out troops to Siam and reminded him that all logistical matters could be handled by the governor of Lao Province, Luan Shaochen. After sending out these 2 telegrams, Yang Chendong's 3rd telegram was also sent out. It was sent to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Xi'an City, Ma Dali. He requested to send people to Siam as soon as possible to negotiate. After sending out the telegram, Yang Qindong waved his hand and sent out troops to Siam. He had the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the New Army, half of the 5th Division of the Lu Army, and a total of 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, temporarily recruited. In total he had more than 70,000 people. It was quite a powerful force. Next it was time for him to seek justice. Wanxiang City. After receiving the telegram, the commander of the 2nd Army, Luo Pe, took the initiative to look for Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan. He said that he would immediately send out troops according to the 6th young master's orders and ask them to help and cooperate with him. Whether it was Luan Shaoqian or Long Tainan, they were both relatives of Yang Qindong. In addition, one of them was the leader of Laos, while the other was in charge of the stability of the public security under Yang Qindong's influence. Both of them were very powerful. Even though Luo Pe was already a major general, he still showed a lot of respect when he saw them. Commander Luo, don't worry. Lao province will definitely listen to the orders of the 6th young master. We will fully support you. If you want money, we will give you money. If you want things, we will give you things. This was Luan Shaoqian's declaration. Then came Long Tianan's voice. Commander Luo, don't worry. I have already discussed with General He Guang. We will try our best to keep up with your pace. During this period we have recruited a total of 40,000 soldiers. We will fully support you. After more than 10 days, while the situation in Suing City was worrying, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan did not stay idle. After they reached a common goal, they did something very bold without being able to contact Yang Qindong. That was to recruit soldiers on the spot. Especially the police force. Under Long Tianan's request, many people joined the army and became members of the Lao army. This allowed the army to expand in a short period of time and reached a total of 40,000 people. It was also proven that their thoughts were the same as Yang Qindong's. As expected, Cambodia province started to expand the army. However, Lao province's actions were done before this order. Because of this, Luan Shaoqian and Long Tainan jointly signed a telegram to Yang Qindong to ask for forgiveness. Not only was military power important, it was also very sensitive. It was like a double-edged sword. If used well, it could be used to kill the enemy. If not, it would hurt oneself. Knowing this, the two of them had to show some attitude. Of course, Yang Qindong also had to show some attitude. He ended the telegram by telling them not to do it again. This was also a reminder to some people that privately recruiting and dispatching troops was not allowed. This warning was a warning that it would not happen again. After receiving support, Commander Luo Pe finally let loose. Other than the 7th Division who remained in Vietnam to stabilize the situation, the 2nd Division and the 6th Division moved out. They suddenly left Wanxiang City and charged towards the Siamese camp outside the city. Following behind these two divisions were the 40,000 newly recruited Lao army soldiers. They were made up of young and strong Lao army soldiers who had yet to get used to each other. At this point, the North, South and East 5-star armies started to retaliate against Siam. On the north was the 2nd and 6th Divisions led by Luo Pe, as well as the 40,000 Lao soldiers, a total of 67,000 men. On the east was the 1st Cavalry Division led by Yang Qindong, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, half of the 5th Division and 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, a total of 74,000 men. On the south was the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st C Division. They had a total of 17,000 soldiers. Among them, C's 2nd Division Zhao Chongqiao had already captured Pearl Island, later known as Phuket Island, cutting off Siam's southern road by land. After C's 1st Division occupied Samui Island, they used the water to enter the land and surrounded Pattaya, later known as Tabaya, which was southeast of Bangkok, forming complete control over the entire southern sea of Siam. When the North Army left Wanxiang City, they caught the Siam Army off guard. Over the past few days, the Siam Army had gotten used to the 5-star Army's defense and did not expect them to suddenly attack. The 20,000 unprepared Siam Army was crippled by the 2nd and 6th Divisions of the Lu Army. Amidst the sounds of gunfire, they were defeated. In less than an hour they left behind 3,000 corpses and fled. Luo Pejuan left the task of cleaning up the battlefield to the 40,000 Lao soldiers led by Long Tainan and General He Guang. Then he continued to lead the 2 army divisions to Wulong City, an important city in the north of Siam. At this moment Siam's General Godin was in the city. He had just heard the news of the 5-star army's attack. Not long after he saw his soldiers being defeated. He also saw the 5-star army soldiers in green chasing after his soldiers. The intelligence personnel had already reported the information. Every 5-star army soldier who could wear a formal suit belonged to the elite faction. They were not easy to deal with. Although Godin had 200,000 soldiers, he did not dare to be careless. He immediately ordered his men to prepare to defend the city. Cannons, bows, rocks and kerosene were all prepared. For the sake of safety, he didn't even have the slightest intention of letting the 10,000 defeated soldiers outside the city into the city. Chapter 1039. If they didn't open the gates, they would only lose 10,000 soldiers. Once they opened the gates, the main force would be in danger. With the city's defense and the 50 cannons, they might be able to inflict heavy damage to the main force of the 5-star army. General Gordon was ambitious. This time he wanted to use his actions to humiliate the 5-star army. He wanted to tell them that the Siamese army wasn't like the Tsonglan army or the Phnom Penh army. They were capable of fighting. While Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city, the 5-star corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city so that he could destroy one of them with his cannons. The 5-star corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Looking down from above, Gordon saw that the 5-star army stopped moving when they were 5 miles away. He didn't understand what they were up to. He didn't have to wait for long before reality told him the truth. Luo Po ordered the cannons to open fire. The mortar cannons could fire up to 13 li away. Using Wulong City, which was only 5 li away, as a target, it was as easy as playing a game. A total of 40 cannons rained down on the city walls, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Gordon, who was waiting for the enemy to approach, didn't expect the enemy to open fire from such a distance. His cannons could only fire up to a distance of 1,000 meters. This caused him to subconsciously limit his vision. Then, amidst the explosions, he was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. Fortunately, the soldiers beside him were very diligent. They pushed General Gordon to the ground. With 1 dead, 1 heavily injured and 2 lightly injured, Gordon was safe and sound. He only lost his hearing temporarily. Not only Gordon, the Siamese soldiers on the city tower also lost their hearing. Other than the buzzing sound, they couldn't hear anything from the outside world. After a round of bombardment, the 2nd and 6th divisions started to charge forward. To the cold front warriors who had to train at least 3 to 5 kilometers a day, a distance of 2,500 meters was nothing. Under the cover of the artillery, they arrived at the city gate that had already been destroyed. After a round of gunfire, they opened up a path and easily killed their way into the city. On the tower, the 50 cannons that had been transported to the North Tower had been reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Beside him there were almost 1,000 dead bodies of the Siamese soldiers. The other survivors, including General Gordon, had already fled downstairs. In other words, it wasn't that they were useless. It was that their opponents were too strong. Facing the 2nd and 6th Division, who were fully equipped with firearms, the Siamese soldiers were caught off guard. They didn't even know much about them. Thus, they suffered a great loss in the first battle. The 200,000 soldiers of the Siamese army retreated like fish in the sea. It could be said that human potential was infinite. With the mentality of saving their lives, the Siamese soldiers retreated so quickly that the 5-star army couldn't catch up to them. Except for a few who managed to catch up, the main force of the Siamese army fled south. After the victory of the first battle, they killed and captured 30,000 Siamese soldiers. Wulong City was handed over to the Laotian army. After a simple rest, Luo Yin led the 2 divisions and continued south. The news of the defeat on the northern battlefield quickly spread back to Manga City. In the palace hall, King Li Qi showed an expression of disbelief, and asked a very idiotic question in front of all the civil and military officials. What is the 5-star army doing? Are they going to destroy Siam like they did to Lonsong and Golden Rim? Proud people would always magnify their own strengths for no reason, but at the same time, they would also magnify their enemies' weaknesses. In Eliqui's eyes, Siam was the strongest army in the world. Perhaps it was a little weaker than the five-star army, but they had their own strengths. How could they be bullied so easily? Eliqui's shout attracted a lot of discussion in the palace. Then Prime Minister Hamad stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the five-star army is coming. Looking at the fate of Landsong and Golden Rim, we must be prepared for a war. Sure, let's fight. Who's afraid?" Siam had just entered the era of big cities. In comparison, its politics were clean and the people were loyal. Strength was not weak. This was also where Eliqui's foundation lay. Before the war, Eliqui had found Hamad and a few other important officials. After a discussion, they agreed that the five-star army was not strong enough to destroy Siam. In other words, even if they lost the war, they could just lower their heads and give some compensation. The possibility of the country being destroyed was still very small. It was because of this point that Eliqui agreed to send troops. He wanted to take the five-star army by surprise and reshuffle the cards in Southeast Asia. Now it seemed that it did play a role in the early stages. They even surrounded Yangqindong. At that time, victory was so close. Unfortunately, Tongxi did not take advantage of this opportunity. In the end, he missed out on victory. Since they could not win, they had to think about how to stay in an invincible position. Considering the plan prepared before the war, Prime Minister Hamad continued, "Your Majesty, I request to send a message to the five-star army to negotiate. Please allow it." Proved. Eliqui had to nod and agree. Unless he was prepared to fight to the death with the five-star army, he could only negotiate and use this method to quell the flames of war. Under the cold consent of King Eliqui, the royal capital Bangkok once again gathered 200,000 troops to prepare for war. They were ready to support the various battlefields at any time. At the same time, they also sent a message to the five-star army to express their intention to negotiate. The so-called peace talks were often the result of fighting. Fighting and fighting, fighting and fighting, everything came to a conclusion. In the end, it was a happy scene for everyone. After the Siam army lost the upper hand, the news of peace talks came. The commander of the East Army, Yangqindong, who was leading the army to Siam, laughed after hearing the news. All of this was within his expectations. He even sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in advance and asked them to send people over. Peace talks? They killed so many of our brothers. Now that our reinforcements are here, they are afraid. They want peace talks. How can there be such a good thing in the world? Beta Persei muttered to express his anger. Beta Persei's opinion made Yangqindong speechless. In this battle, more than 200 black cavalry soldiers and more than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division died. It was a heavy loss. But in comparison, what benefits did the Siam army gain? The number of people captured and killed had exceeded 120,000. This was already a 30-fold loss ratio. At this moment, the king of Siam was the one suffering, not him. But then again, the lives of the five-star army soldiers were very important. How could it be compared to the Siam army? From this point of view, Beta Persei's words were not wrong. That's right. It's impossible to talk about peace and let this matter slide. This time we are determined to get Siam. Yangqindong's attitude was very firm. Beta Persei's eyes lit up when he heard this. However, Yangqindong's next words made Beta Persei a little confused. But based on the information we have, Siam prepared a full 800,000 soldiers before this battle. So far we have destroyed about 200,000 soldiers. There are at least 600,000 soldiers left. Beta Persei, tell me, with our current strength, can we defeat them? Yes, 600,000 is. Beta Persei stopped mid-sentence. This was 600,000, not 60,000. The total number of soldiers of the five-star armies, even if the average Diping were to be included, they would only have around 150 to 160,000 men. Even if they wanted to destroy the enemy, they still had to split up their forces to defend the cities that they had occupied. Beta Persei did not speak, and Yangqindong did not intend to ask any more questions. Instead, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of Siam. A bold plan was formed in his mind again. This plan could be expressed in a very simple way. There were only 4 words: training troops on the battlefield. Soldiers who had never been on the battlefield could not be considered real warriors. This was true for ordinary soldiers. After a few battles, Yangqindong had already seen his disadvantage. That was, he had too few troops. If he was so weak to deal with the Siam army, wouldn't he be in the same predicament if he was forced to fight against a bigger force in the future? For the future, he also needed to prepare for military training. How could he create a decent army in a short period of time? Their strength could not be said to be on par with the Cold Front, but at least they had to meet the requirements of a B-level army. After thinking about it, the only good idea was to train troops on the battlefield. With the 600,000 soldiers of Siam as a whetstone, Yang Qindong wanted to see how many B-level troops he could train. In order to achieve this goal, more local battles were needed. That was to say, how to fight the Siamese army continuously and make them send out their troops without getting angry became the most important thing. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the best way was to talk while fighting. That was why he was so optimistic and hopeful about the upcoming negotiations between the two sides. Before Yang Qindong had to wait too long, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came. It was their minister Ma Dali. Yang Qindong was somewhat surprised by Ma Dali's personal visit. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who stayed in Xi'an City to preside over the overall situation. How could he come out so easily? Seeing the obvious doubt in Yang Qindong's eyes, Ma Dali smiled bitterly and said, "Sixth young master, for the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most important thing is the war with Siam, so I came in person." You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.